What matters most to your employees? Can you measure their happiness? People are the lifeblood of your business, and Glint helps you understand how they're feeling. It all starts when you ask questions. Questions that uncover insights about your people. And the more you ask, the more you learn. Feedback fuels insights. Insights power action. Now you can gain a true understanding of your employees, guiding you toward a workplace where people can be happier and more successful. Because when your people succeed, your organization succeeds. Ready to reimagine your business with your people at the center?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world today. Welcome back to day 2 of the 2020 Virtual People Success Summit. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Katie Farrow. I'm the head of storytelling at Glint, and I will once again be your MC and your virtual Sherpa for this week. Before we kick things off, I want to reflect on a key theme of people success, one that's foundational to our ability to be successful and is very basic to the concept itself. And that's the idea of leaning into the employee voice. One of the most common hurdles we hear from our customers is the propensity when things get really, really rough to not ask employees how they're doing. When they're going through a merger and acquisition, maybe a downsizing exercise, or even a leadership transition, the natural instinct is to lean away. But as we've learned in the last 24 hours, for many organizations, including probably your own, COVID has been different. I mentioned yesterday that the average number of pulses that our customers are engaging with on an annual basis has increased from 3 to 7 in the last several months. And some customers are taking it even further. In her keynote yesterday, Mala, the Chief People Officer of EA, referenced the company's always-on COVID pulse, allowing employees around the world to leave feedback anytime they want. You'll hear similar stories today of organizations throwing open the doors to feedback, welcoming the employee voice, and challenging and encouraging managers and leaders to respond quickly in small, concrete ways that are meaningful to their people. I know many of you at home have had this experience over the last couple months as well. For many of the companies you're hearing from this week, and surely from your own as well, this was not the plan. They were going about this in ways that were methodical, with a timeline and a process and stakeholders and the whole shebang. But obviously life threw a wrench in those plans. They had to adjust, sometimes on a day's notice, sometimes an hour's notice. But what we also touched on yesterday, even as employees are sharing how they feel, and how they feel isn't always great, and in some cases, it's getting worse, they're also expressing gratitude for simply being asked. This gratitude and this recognition that their voices are heard and responded to has been a source of energy for these organizations that have really gone for it. The feedback from employees has been an upswell of perspectives and advice about how the organization can support them even better. These voices are a guide to leadership, giving them the real-time insight they desperately need into what's working, what's not working, and how the organization should think about the workplace of the future. That's why this term that we've come to love so much at Glint over the past couple of months has a double meaning. Thank you for asking is a common response from employees these days. Like Lori from Bristol Myers Squibb said yesterday, one of the major themes in comments over the last couple of months has been one of gratitude and pride. Our employees are proud to work in an organization that's so committed to their well-being and that's also committed to asking them to be a part of the solution. But thank you for asking also applies to leaders. They're grateful that the company, through your work, has asked employees what they can do to help. That's why many of you have expressed to me and over the last couple of days that you're the most popular person in the virtual office. This data has become a goldmine, especially in times of change. It's a moment of confidence in a landscape that's been defined by anxiety and uncertainty. I'm so glad you're here again today to continue your people success journey with us, to continue to learn from one another, and to provide even more value and confidence to your leaders, your managers, and your people. The work you do is so important. So thank you for being here. So let's get into it. Today, we'll continue our main sessions with a fireside chat from LinkedIn's Chief People Officer, Twyla Hansen, followed by interactive sessions on the other two pillars of people success, effectively implementing change and measuring and expanding on progress. We'll wrap with an Ask the Experts panel featuring a number of our bravest people science consultants. And tomorrow will be the region and topic specific breakout sessions, as well as our Glint customer breakout session. Remember, you can find which sessions you're registered for in your personalized agenda in the attendee hub. And as a reminder, please continue to ask questions of our speakers in the Q&A box below, and look for more resources in the resources tab above. If you miss a session or would like to go back and learn more, you can rewatch sessions by going to the All Sessions tab and clicking on the session you're interested in. So now I'm excited to be introducing two incredible women for our first session today, Glint People Science Leader Amy Lavoie and LinkedIn's Chief People Officer Twyla Hansen. Enjoy.
Thanks, Katie. I am so excited for today's session. I will be joined by LinkedIn's Chief People Officer, Twyla Hansen, who leads the team responsible for hiring, developing top talent, including all benefits, employee experience, and diversity, inclusion, and belonging. No small feat. Hi, Twyla. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Amy. I'm excited to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. So before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you're working on at LinkedIn, and one thing we would not find on your LinkedIn profile.
Okay, I'll start with the one thing that you can't find on my LinkedIn profile is for years, my family and I have taken a week during the summer to go to a very, very remote off-the-grid campsite, which has been not the highlight of my vacation because it involves a ton of dirt and hot weather and mosquitoes. But this year we went, during the pandemic, and it was the most glorious week. It was nice to unplug. It was also, we're so off the grid that you could just kind of forget that we were in a pandemic because we were in such an isolated location. So it was actually the first year that I actually, appreciated being so remote and off the grid and just, having time to just be present with my family. So that's one thing that's not on my LinkedIn profile. let's see, about me. I am, first and foremost, a mom of 2 teenage boys. I have a 17-year-old senior and a 14-year-old freshman. And, I think about them. They're both in boarding schools. So I think about them and how they're doing, how they're thriving in this environment all the time. I also am a wife, also a chief people officer of LinkedIn. And I've been at LinkedIn for 5 months now. It has been an intense, wild, but absolutely thoroughly enjoyable 5 months. And currently what we're working on is our global talent organization strategy. So that's sort of what I'm in the middle of right now. I've spent the last 5 months listening a ton, meeting with a ton of leaders, individual contributors, really trying to understand the value of the talent organization to LinkedIn. And I've been spending, several sessions with the leadership team, taking this information and really mapping out what do we need, how do we need to organize ourselves, and what services do we need to provide to LinkedIn in the future so that we could help LinkedIn grow and thrive. So that work is a lot of fun. It's also hard work when you're thinking through prioritization and what matters most and what direction the organization is going and how to make sure that we have a really strong backbone in the talent organization. So that's a little bit about myself. Oh, also, I am a dog parent. Pandemic. We have a pandemic puppy. Her name is Mulligan, and we adopted her, rescued her back in April. So during the pandemic, I've been spending a lot of time watching YouTube videos and learning how to train her.
Oh, that is wonderful. What kind of breed is Mulligan?
We're not exactly sure. But we believe that she's a Snorky, which is a mix between a mini Schnauzer and a Yorkie.
Oh my goodness, so cute. I'm loving all of the pandemic pups in our neighborhood. And we have a rescue as well. And whenever anyone asks that question, we just say he's 100% awesome. That's all we got. All right, wonderful. So in the same light of something we would not find on your LinkedIn profile, what are you reading or listening to these days? Is there a book or a podcast that you're loving, and why?
Yeah, so I'm currently reading Jay Shetty's Think Like a Monk book. I'm kind of halfway through, and it's been really nice. He has such a great story. Where he lived for years in an ashram as a monk, and sort of bringing his learnings to the mainstream world. So I'm excited to hopefully I'll be able to finish that book in the next few days. And the top podcast that I always try to catch is Brene Brown's Unlocking Us. I feel like she has such a beautiful and simple way of providing like real-time coaching. Sort of the topics are spot on. Her way of getting to a place of vulnerability and growth, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's, such a great podcast. So, that's what's filling my free time right now.
Oh, that's awesome. I love Brene Brown and Unlocking Us. I feel like, I know she started recording that before the pandemic, but it felt like that was like such a gift to us during the pandemic. Like we all needed a little more Brene Brown in our lives. And actually, she has this one quote that has been so present for me throughout all of this. And she says, "Be awkward, brave, and kind." And I keep coming back to that one. It feels so relevant for people leaders right now. Like there's a lot of awkwardness, but if we approach that with bravery and we challenge our leaders and organizations to be better, and then we keep, compassion and people at the center, that we can get through this and we can have a profound impact. But yeah, the awkwardness is a good reminder for me. It just feels really, really relevant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. So our audience here today has come together around this unique concept we talk a lot about at Glint called people success, which we define as bringing your best self to work to do your best work. I know that this has actually been an important element in your career, including your last role prior to LinkedIn. Can you tell me about your journey with people success and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, I actually had the title of, Vice President of People Success and Inclusion at the San Francisco Fed. And to give you a little bit of insight around, that title, essentially I was leading the HR function and the inclusion and diversity function. But we were really intentional at the Fed around trying to implement a cultural shift. We were going through a cultural transformation at the San Francisco Fed where we wanted to be very intentional around being clear that the role of human resource wasn't just to ensure that, payroll was going out on time or that we were going to, harass people around, did you get your performance ratings in? But it was really around an experience that we intentionally wanted to make sure that every employee within the organization knew that there was a function that was absolutely dedicated to ensure that employees were set up for success, that we were creating programs, we were investing in initiatives and activities to ensure that we had an organization that was thriving and able to do their best work. So that's sort of, the story. And we thought, what a better way to signal a cultural transformation than to, sort of redefine the value proposition for the organization through our naming conventions. And so, with that came a lot of responsibility around okay, so you've changed your name, show us what that means. And we did a lot of investment around, changing our performance rating structure, introducing new behaviors and competencies into the organization, ensuring to our employees that we trusted them by removing, heavy burdened, multiple pages of rule books and replaced it with, values around trust and decision making and empowering both employees and managers to do the right thing for the organization. So it was a lot of fun to be able to provide that mindset and that, sort of help lead in that cultural transformation to the organization. But I think there's just, a ton of alignment, behind, what Glint is, how Glint thinks about people success and my journey with, building a people success team.
That is so cool. It's so cool. We always talk about that words really matter and that you can really start to shift mindsets by using different words. It's so cool and bold, brave, and to do that. Thanks for sharing that. So if anyone is doing the math, when Twyla introduced herself about when she started at LinkedIn, you probably gathered that that Twyla, you started at LinkedIn in the middle of a pandemic with a large part of the LinkedIn workforce remote. So what have you, as a chief people officer, learned during this pandemic about the employee experience, and how do you think that this pandemic will shape how we reimagine people's success in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. This is such an important question. So I was very fortunate when I started in June at LinkedIn. My leadership team was able to immediately give me our employee voice survey results, and so I immediately had information about the current sentiment of our employees. So shortly, which preceded me, but shortly after the pandemic started, the team thought that, it really made sense to increase the employee voice survey pulse so we could understand how our employees were feeling. And, what I understood is that our employees, I think like, many other organizations, they felt burnt out. They had difficulty managing boundaries between life and work. I think, not having a commute, not having those moments to ramp up. Several people were waking up, taking a shower, turning on their computer, and, life just became very truncated in that regard. And people felt insecure about the future, what was happening in the environment, insecure about jobs and career progression. So that was really important, and very helpful that we had that information. And then also within the Global Talent Organization, we had, it's still going on, this wonderful pilot between the Glint and Microsoft workforce analytic teams, really helping us think through how can we deeply understand what was happening in regards to wellness, how people were working, and how people are collaborating since the pandemic. And the results were quite stark and really interesting. Not only were we able to confirm that people were indeed working longer hours, but that their days were really full of meetings, and really trying to understand that, what was happening there. Was it because people were feeling the lack of connection with going into the office and wanting to meet more, or needing to work more because they didn't have the informal interactions to have a quick 30-second chat or catch up, and instead were scheduling 15-30-minute meetings. We were also, what was really insightful for us is that we were able to identify various personas of individuals within the talent organization, and really pinpoint who are the people who are thriving. Who are the people who, we see they have good wellness scores, good belonging scores, and what can we learn in regards to their pattern of work? And that was really insightful. So we learned that employees who are truly thriving in this environment were able to somehow, and I need to learn this, cap their meetings to 3 hours a day on average, so 15 hours a week being in meetings. They were also able to have up to 5 hours of dedicated focus time. So that also included they were emailing during that time. They were also, on Teams chatting, using collaboration tools, but they weren't distracted or disrupted by having to shift in going in and out of meetings. Also, an important insight is that employees were able to limit their after hours time to just about 40 minutes after hours. So you weren't seeing that, email traffic or chatting traffic was going into, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. They were really able to cap it to just about 40 minutes. So, that was a really good indication that they were able to shut off, really have some downtime, and really be able to take care of themselves or their families, or, just have some time to themselves. So that was it's hugely valuable information for us to understand that data and figure out ways of how to replicate it and scale it across a larger group of employees.
Oh, that's so interesting. It has been, as we've started to do more and more of integrating Glint data, which we would kind of refer to as the data that indicates how people feel, with Microsoft Workplace Analytics data, which is more about how they behave. Putting those two things together and being able to say, really it helps you just have such a deeper understanding. And I think it's fascinating. For example, the 40 minutes, kind of capping that extra time at 40 minutes. It's not saying that people need these really strict boundaries. They're okay if there's a little bit of bleeding in, but there needs to be a limit to that, and you just understand a nuance in a different way. And I think sometimes without looking at those two things together, you can kind of run off, and you could think there's a problem and there isn't a problem, or the flip of that, you may not realize that there's an underlying thing. That is just really, really cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. The second part of your question was in regards to the future. So I'll spend a couple of moments explaining how we're thinking about what does the future, what lies ahead for us in the future. The way that we talk about it at LinkedIn is that the future of work will be flexible and equitable. So we've spent some time really thinking about, the fact that, as a colleague at LinkedIn, so eloquently says, it's the genie's out of the bottle. So that means that, if there are leaders who really believed that, FaceTime mattered and, they didn't believe in remote work, that the genie's out of the bottle. We're able to see through, the last few months that we are able to be productive and, help the organization perform, being in a remote environment, and that when things do return, when we can safely return to work locations, there is going to be a shift in the dynamics between who's in the office and who's not in the office. So we recently announced that, in order to promote a more flexible work environment, that employees can work remotely up to 50% of the time without manager approval. We also shared, how, transparent guidelines around how employees who are interested in relocation, permanent moves, working remotely permanently, how they could do that through conversations with their managers and with their leaders. And then we're currently working on functional guidance around teaming and team agreements. So we're really excited about that body of work. We're also taking a holistic view with really trying to understand how do we make sure that we're looking after the LinkedIn culture, which matters a lot to us at LinkedIn, and we've relied in the past on in-person events, people seeing each other, eating with each other, being able to be in person to share information. And we're thinking about what that's going to look like in the future. So we're looking at, people and culture, technology and tools, as well as workspace, and just really trying to understand from a holistic perspective, how can we ensure that we are, that we're delivering a really great LinkedIn cultural experience in the future with a distributed workforce. So we're starting off with taking a deep dive at looking at all of our culture and values and trying to think through in the future, how do we look at people, culture, technology, tools, and workplace to ensure that we are promoting our culture and our values in a really intentional and explicit way through, rituals, information sharing, how we reward behaviors to make sure that we have a really good sense of maintaining our culture and driving a healthy culture in the future.
That's fantastic. We know from our research that culture is always evolving and changing, whether or not we want it to. And especially in times of major change, that can, the culture change itself can be accelerated. And actually, since COVID, we've seen that culture is actually becoming more important to employees than some of the more traditional drivers like career opportunities. So I just think it's really great that LinkedIn is being so intentional about how that culture evolves, really trying to try to influence that and shape that, and not, let it completely shape itself. So it's also really clear from all of these things that you shared that feedback from your employees has been really key in some of the decisions that and changes that you've made and that leadership has made. How would you describe the role of data in informing decisions at LinkedIn? And can you give us any other examples of something else that you and leadership have done as a result of people data?
Yeah. So in regards to the culture work that we're doing, we're using our Glint survey in order for us to measure culture and see how culture is evolving and how our employees are resonating with our values. So that's really critical for us to understand that data as we're thinking about how our culture is going to evolve in the future. In addition, I think another really important piece of what we saw during the pandemic is that we asked a question in our Glint survey around just a simple question like, how are you doing? And we received thousands of responses, just open text around how people were doing. That information was incredibly critical so that we could, parse through that and understand how do we need to communicate in a different way. Do we need to, which we did, provide our employees with a wellness day off? Do we need to, which we also did, provide our employees with a no meeting day, and really making sure that we are designing communications and programs, employee resources, looking at our benefits that's really designed to resonate and alleviate the concerns that our employees have during this time. So that data is critical, and it also informed us of another question that was really important for us to add, which is, do you feel well supported? So that we have this, constant feedback mechanism, or listening tool to ensure that our employees are feeling supported. That informs whether we needed to do a quick sprint and pivot to introduce an Ask Me Anything session, or take another look at our mental health offerings. So I feel that without having that data, you're just operating a little bit with one arm behind your back, and doing this sort of thing, just kind of hoping that what you design is going to really help employees, give them a sense of calm, a sense of stability, so that they're able to do their best work in the organization. So having that data is just absolutely critical, so that we could really understand that everything that we do is meaningful and that it resonates with our employees in a very positive way.
That's fantastic. I think one positive thing that I've seen across our customers, and I think LinkedIn was really early to jump on this, was, really kind of bringing this concept of well-being and, kind of starting to lean into mental health and saying, like, we have got to, and I actually think one of one of the executives at LinkedIn said, early on, like, we have got to keep an eye on well-being right now, and starting to ask that question, how are you doing? And letting employees talk about, how they're feeling and the pressures, and, really just making that part of the dialogue, not something that we have to sort of put away and pretend isn't happening at work, but actually bring that into the conversation, allow managers to talk to their teams about it. And then all of the incredible resources that LinkedIn has rolled out to support employees has been so powerful. And I hope that we remain focused on well-being for a long time. I think I think the world needs employers that are willing to talk about this stuff at work. So it's been nice to see. Another thing that we hear a lot from people leaders is that they're really focused on trying to build community, connection, belonging in a world where so many of us are outside of the office and not, interacting face-to-face with our colleagues. I'd love to hear a little more about how you think about community, connection, and belonging, and how do you work with your team to create greater belonging among employees?
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult thing to do right now. But I also believe that this is a moment, I'd like to think that 18 months from now, when we look back at this time, we see that this is a time that actually brought us together. That it's a moment that, although we're separated by physical location, that sort of emotionally and through just relationships, that we're building, the deepest, most trusting relationships that we ever had. And I feel that way with my team, just because we're in uncharted waters. I think, most of us are. And there is something about creating connection when you're trying to work through really hard, challenging, complex issues together. It requires a high level of trust. It requires, those folks who are saying, what, give it to me, I'll do it, I'll take it. It requires your team being able to say, hey, we'll have your back. If you fail, we're there. We're going to be there to catch you. Like, this is the time, I think, in a career where those sorts of behaviors are real. They're present, because no one has a playbook for how to lead through an organization and how to inspire and motivate during a pandemic. And if they did write that book 100 years ago, right, no one can find it right now. So I think it's really about just being intentional about the moment that we're in, calling out that this is the time that we have to be high trust, that we have to create deep relationships, even though we can't, get together and share lunch together, or, maybe go out after work. that we are finding those moments, even when we're in meetings together, to really set aside that time to be present. So it's something that we do with our leadership team. Is every time that we're together, we set aside a good chunk of time just to be present, to be able to share, what's up for us personally. What are we doing during the pandemic to, sort of take care of ourselves? What are we binge watching? So that we could just really, bring that human element and connection. And I think as an organization, also through our all hands, through, I have an ongoing weekly communication that I send out to the organization, just making sure that it's personal, that we're sharing information that resonates to people, so that they're seen, they're heard, and that they feel that they're cared for. So I think that's our approach of how we've been able to really continue to foster belonging and care within the organization.
That's fantastic. It's such a good point to, one of the qualities of high performing teams is that's very stands out amongst other drivers of high performing teams is that you have goals and objectives that are bigger than what any one person can achieve. So that really kind of brings people together to say, I can't do this alone. I have to figure out a way to work together. And gosh, if these times are not big, hairy, audacious goals, and I don't know what is. It's a really good point about the fact that we can actually connect on a challenge at a level that we have not often seen before, and that can actually in itself drive connection. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Twila. Well, I've really enjoyed the discussion so far, and I really appreciate you sharing how you're thinking about so many hot topics that I know our audience is thinking about in the new world of work, well-being. We've talked about a lot, flexibility, culture, fostering community. I could keep going, but I wanted to make sure our audience has a chance to ask some questions as well. So I want to go ahead and dive right in there. All right, it looks like we've got a question here from Yuko. So how have you addressed fostering an innovative and collaborative environment with remote employees? Similarly, have you thought about psychological safety in a virtual setting?
Yeah, that's great. I think what's really interesting about this remote environment from an innovation perspective is, I think that when speaking for myself, when I was in a physical location, there were certain people that I saw every day because they were, sort of on my way to my office and, out and from my office out. And there were just, kind of the same people that I saw every day that I was able to, stop by and ask about their family and, sort of check out what, photos were that they had, on their desk. One thing that I find that's really interesting in the remote world is that we don't have those, if you want to call it a barrier anymore. That we have access to a whole lot of different people. And if we think about it from that perspective, like, who in the organization did I not connect with, that I didn't have, an opportunity to share an idea in the break room, because you're pretty much sharing ideas in the break room with the people who just happen to sit next to you, so that your physical location actually could be limiting in terms of innovation and ideation. And so there's an opportunity for us now to take advantage of the fact that, maybe by time zones or by geography, you have those limitations, but that you're being really intentional with connecting with people that you haven't connected with before, which would have been very difficult if you were in different office locations or different buildings or on different floors. So I think just a shift in mindset around who are you connecting with, like who's your network of people that you're connecting with every day, taking a look at that, or looking at your calendar at the end of the week and thinking through, how do you expand that and just take advantage of the fact that we have access to a lot of different people in the remote environment. I think just that simple shift will expose you to more people with diverse ideas, diverse backgrounds, which will lead to innovation. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Let's see. Have you thought about psychological safety in a virtual setting?
Yeah, and so we had a global leadership summit here at LinkedIn a few months ago, and we had a session on psychological safety. And so that was really important for all of our leaders in the organization to really, hear about psychological safety, understand how to provide that, and then to take that back to our teams. And I think it's a little bit more challenging being able to read body language and understand if people feel like they can speak out, bring their best selves to work in a remote environment. I think that is one of the challenges with being on, in the virtual environment. It's those subtle cues that you can't quite pick up on. So I think having more, figuring out how managers could have more one-on-one time with employees, and not sort of assessing how employees show up when you're in group meetings, but spending that one-on-one time to ensure that employees feel like they can participate, they can butt in, they're raising their hands, they feel like they can contribute into meetings, and that they have the environment that they need to thrive is really critically important at this time, because I think we're all sort of at a disadvantage with being able to pick up on subtle cues that we had in the physical, when we were together in a physical location.
Yeah, that's great. I'll say one thing too that's been surprising for me that I think has helped with psychological safety and inclusion as well is, having like the chat feature within Zoom and poll features. I've really started with my team to start to ask questions and say, okay, everybody first, before anyone chimes in, answer in the chat. And you kind of have a little bit of technology almost gives you like a little bit of a way to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak up. Whereas, sometimes the loudest voice is the one that gets the most airtime. And it's kind of one of those, those bonuses that I didn't quite realize, just becoming really present about the fact that if dominant voices take over in an in-person setting, it's almost exacerbated on virtual meetings. And so how do we use that technology to give everybody a chance to chime in?
I love that, Amy. I'm writing that down because I
sometimes forget, but yeah, it does. It's really helpful. It's really helpful. And there's just sometimes so many great ideas that come in, and then you can have the conversation, but it gives everybody a chance. Okay, let's see here. Lots of great questions coming in. So let's see. What advice this is from Jesse. What advice do you have to people starting out in employee engagement or looking to get more involved in engagement at their company?
What a great place that you're in. I think, the future of HR is definitely around understanding how to engage, motivate employees, particularly as we move to a more distributed hybrid work environment. So I think, first of all, congratulations. I think you're in a really good spot to have a very robust future in the HR space. I would say analytics, being able to get your arms around data, understanding what the trends are, understanding how do you identify those key patterns for high engagement and figure out how to replicate that. And then, I think that, people leaders, there's a shift going on right now that the pandemic provided us. I think there's just a new role for people who are in human resources or people who are in, particularly employee engagement. There's just this new role because I think, what we had to rely on in the past, where we're able to walk by and see people and, use other, human ways of determining whether we can inspire and motivate people, all of that has gone away. So I think the more that you're helping leaders look around the corner with data and providing those insights and being able to, really lift up what a profile of success looks like among the highly engaged group in your organization, it's just, going deeper in that area is going to be just of huge value to all organizations as we design for the future.
That's awesome. Great. Okay, one final question I want to squeeze in because I love it so much. This one comes from Taylor. So across the things you've seen as well as that you've heard from your peers, what are some of the workplace trends you're seeing that inspire you or give you hope?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for that, Taylor. I think, one thing that is really fascinating right now is the just creativity in the DIB space, in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging space. I think we're seeing, in the past, it's been very US centric topic, and a little slower around global organizations and international workforces to understand the value of diversity and inclusion and belonging programs. And I'm just seeing more global organizations really step into this, really sort of learn from what we've done, here in the United States and other organizations, and figure out where they have pockets of exclusion in their countries and doing things. I just think there's a lot of innovation and people doing a lot of different cool things to really try to positively disrupt and put some meaningful energy and action in the diversity space. And so what I'm thinking about right now, it's really turning on its head pipelining activities, really turning on its head. How do you get to pockets of underrepresented groups and engage them in a different way by really focusing on skills as opposed to pedigree or where somebody went to school, to really just disrupt how we think about bringing talent into the organization in very non-traditional ways. So I think, what we're seeing in the skill space is directly correlated to what we're going to see sort of unlock in the diversity space right now. So it's super exciting to see.
That's awesome. And it feels like it's here to stay. This is not a short-term focus. That's 100%. Wonderful. Twyla, we are out of time. It was so wonderful to get to chat with you today and learn from you today. I really want to thank you for joining us and sharing so openly your own experience personally as well as at LinkedIn. Thanks for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Amy. It was my pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us today for this fireside chat. I will now pass it back to Katie, who will let us know what to expect next.
Thanks, Amy, and thank you so much, Amy and Twyla, for that great conversation. What a great note to end on for our first session. So before we kick it off into a little break, I want to introduce you to our next people-driven leader. Yesterday, I introduced this concept as the kind of missing link, the elusive link, if you will, that really drives our people success efforts. And the next people-driven leader I'm going to introduce you to is Joan Burke, who's the Chief People Officer at DocuSign, a longtime customer of Flint and a longtime friend of mine. And I think she's an inspiration to all of us. So we will kick it off into that video and we'll meet back here at the top of the hour to talk about implementing change. See you then.
I'm really excited to be here today with Joan Burke, the Chief People Officer at DocuSign, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last several years. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jim. My pleasure, too.
At DocuSign, you've built this really amazing culture. I'd love if you could spend a little bit of time talking about the culture at DocuSign and the philosophy that went into creating it.
Sure. So one of the things that was important to us was to articulate what it was that we thought was special about DocuSign and is a differentiator from other organizations. We wanted to create a culture at DocuSign where people would come there to do the work of their lives. If I'm your manager, my role is to be able to understand what does it mean for you, and then how can I help support you, and how can the company develop the kinds of opportunities and the kinds of programs that is going to have you say, when you hang it up and you're looking back at your career, DocuSign was a place that did the work of my life.
And how did you go about creating that very special culture?
So when I joined DocuSign, we were growing so fast that we did what a lot of companies do, which is put people in a management role, and then it was kind of sink or swim.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time, and we're investing heavily in developing managers so they understand what their role is in creating that.
Managers really are the change agents.
Managers are absolute. In fact, we have a saying at DocuSign. It's that every employee deserves to work for a great manager, and every manager deserves the time and resources to become great.
Tell me a little bit about you as a leader.
There are a couple of really powerful things, in my opinion, about being a strong leader. One is being authentic. I had worked for an organization, and my job was to be with the executives and understand who the high potential talent was, and then create the opportunities for them to be successful. It was a great job. But I had it for a number of years. I was never promoted to be a VP. One of the executives who I did a lot of work with said to me, he said, "Why do you think you had never been promoted to a VP?" And I kind of gave all the typical answers. I said, "Well, it's probably because I didn't do this good enough. I didn't work hard enough here, you know." And he shook his head and he said, "No." He said, "That's not it at all." He said, "I don't care about your sexual orientation, but there are people inside this company who do. And one of them's your boss." People, when I tell that story, oftentimes ask, "Were you mad?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I was not mad. I was freed." That was a gift because it basically said it had nothing to do with how I was showing up, and it had everything to do with other people's perceptions and homophobia, whatever it is, but it was not about Joan.
Wow.
So that changed.
Thank you so much for sharing that. How have you attempted to build more inclusive, more diverse cultures where people feel they belong at DocuSign?
So first, let me just say that the inclusive part of that word is so important, because I remember the first stages of the diversity movement back 20 or so years ago, when chief diversity officers were being hired by large organizations, well-intended, you know, to bring in more women and more underrepresented minorities, but those efforts actually failed in many cases because we didn't know that the inclusion part was so important. And so people would come to the organization but just didn't feel like they belonged, and they weren't successful and they left. So the good thing about, I think, where we are now around diversity and inclusion is we understand that inclusion is every bit as important as the diversity. In fact, we have to have cultures where people feel like they're valued, and where people see people like them.
I know you've got some philosophies about mentoring. Could you share a little bit about what should people look for when they think about mentoring?
One of the things that we do at DocuSign is we have a mentoring program where we call 5 Cups of Coffee. And what we do is we encourage people to identify 5 people in the company that they want to have a cup of coffee with. And they want to have a cup of coffee with because they want to talk to them about that thing that they see them do well. And while it might be overwhelming for someone to say, "Would you be my mentor?" You know, it's not overwhelming when you say, if somebody said to me, "Joan, could you have a cup of coffee with me maybe next week? I really want to hear about how you make presentations because I've seen you do it and I think you do that really well."
Well, you know I'm super passionate about happiness at work. So what's one thing that you do to be happier at work?
The opportunity to be able to sort of engage one-on-one with employees inside the company is the thing that at the end of the day makes me most happy. If I look at my calendar and I see on it that I've got 1 or 2 meetings with an employee that day, it's like, this is going to be a great day. You know, it's as opposed to just sort of being heads down working on a project. So it's kind of what has fueled me my whole career, and it's the reason why human resources has been the right place for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today, Joan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Spectrum Health is the largest employer in West Michigan. We employ almost 30,000 individuals here.
To improve the health of the communities that we serve is our mission.
My family has had service here, my neighbors, my colleagues, people I really care about. That's motivating for me because the work we do each and every day is impacting people I know, care for, and love.
A main focus at Spectrum right now, we're trying to include our employees in decision-making processes, really getting to know them, and then to empower them to innovate, to make change in the system, and to improve the way that we care for our patients.
We are an organization that helps people every day, and people being connected to that, I think, is vitally important.
We chose Glint because we were just ready for a more agile way in which we could get information from our employees, really hear what they're saying, and respond quickly.
The feedback that we receive allows us to know where we need to go to create interventions that support our employees in the workplace and helps them to feel like they are a part of the system and the changes that we make.
It's not only listening, it's taking action on their suggestions because our employees have great feedback.
It allows me to understand where my staff is coming from, how I can work to improve the areas that maybe they're struggling with, and what we're doing really great, and to celebrate those wins.
One of the things that our team does very well, and that I think the Glint survey helps to continue to promote and develop, is that our leaders really understand what fills the buckets of our staff.
A lot of things have changed at Spectrum Health since we started using Glint, and I think most significant has probably been people's awareness to employee engagement and talking about this, making it a priority.
If our employees are not satisfied, that transitions over onto our patients, and so it's important to recognize the satisfaction of the employees is just as important as the satisfaction of the patients.
Sometimes when you are a leader, you're not just leader. You are mother, you are sister, you listen, you cry with them. Just be there for them.
A life at Spectrum is just fantastic.
So I would give a suggestion to any organization that is considering employee listening that they start now.
So how can we move this? Because it is a we thing, it's not a me thing. We have to do it together. I can't change it. We can change it, but I can't change it by myself. And that's what I really appreciate about this organization is at the end of the day, it's all about people.
Hi there, and welcome back. My name is Matt Rodden. I am the Head of People Science Consulting for North America at Glint, and I am thrilled to be the moderator for this next section on day 2 of the Glint People Success Summit. First of all, a huge thank you for Twila and Amy kicking us off with great form this morning, some wonderful discussion and awesome questions. Now, this summit is the absolute highlight of my year. This is now my 3rd Glint Summit, and every year I get to enjoy really inspiring content, thought-provoking discussion, and new connections. It's really like no other event, and while we may be not in person this year, I'm really excited that we get to bring a really big group of people together virtually to experience the summit. One of the reasons why I really love this event is that we make time for really good conversation. So the format of most of the sessions today will be short presentations from some wonderful speakers, followed by a discussion with the panel fueled by your questions. So I have a really fun job today. I get to introduce the speakers. I get to ask them questions. I am here to be your voice today. This is truly your event. You are our people success experts. So please engage in the discussion, ask your questions, which you'll be able to pop into the virtual attendee hub. Now, our first session today is all about effectively implementing change. I was lucky enough to get a preview of the content from our first few speakers, and a couple of themes that really jumped out to me. Number one is the theme of opportunity, seeing change as an opportunity rather than something to fear. I think change often feels really heavy. It's met with resistance. We make excuses that there's too much change going on in our organization. How could we possibly do more? But with everything going on this year, you'll hear from our organizations today, our partners, talking about how change has been a real opportunity for them to shake things up. And then the second theme that I saw within the presentations is of agility, pivoting when things don't go the way that you hope they might, or moving quickly when the environment around you changes. So with that, I'd really love to introduce our first speaker, Devon Voster, who is the Senior Director of Global Talent Acquisition and Talent Management from Whirlpool. Devon, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. I'm excited to be here with all of you today. And as Matt said, I am the Senior Director of Talent Acquisition and Talent Management with Whirlpool Corporation. I lead these teams within our global HR function. And I wanted to share a little bit with you today about Whirlpool's response to the pandemic, particularly how we've been able to focus on agility, resilience, and empathy in our response. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to share just a little bit about who we are as a business, who we are as a company. We are proud to be the world's leading manufacturer of major home appliances. Many of you probably know some of our brands, which are listed along the bottom of this slide. I know for me, I have used my KitchenAid stand mixer more than ever in the last few months, as we've all been spending more time in our homes and in our kitchens. Just a few other stats. We operate in 20 countries across the world, and we have over $20 billion in annual sales. We also have 6 global brands that generate over $1 billion in annual sales. So that's a bit about us as a business. If we can go to the next slide. I wanted to really ground us today in very briefly the global HR strategy at Whirlpool. We've had this in place for a few years now. I'm not going to go into detail, but really wanted to ground us in the 3 main pillars of our strategy. One is extraordinary performance, the second is great people, and the third is a winning culture. And so I draw your attention to this winning culture pillar, and underneath it you can see our imperative under winning culture is to foster a bring out our best culture. And so what that means at Whirlpool is that we're equipping our people leaders to really bring out the best in their teams. And so as we entered 2020, in order to activate this culture, we knew that we needed to focus on our listening strategy. This was a huge part of this imperative, was really starting to listen to our employees much more frequently, really equipping our people leaders with data that will allow them to bring out the best in their team, which we didn't feel we had done a great job of previously, and we really wanted to double down on our efforts there. So we were able to gain approval from our executive team. It did take us quite a while to get approval to shift our approach, and I'll explain why in a minute. But we were able to gain approval to really reset our listening strategy and take a very different approach. And that was one of our highest priorities as we entered into 2020. So if you can go to the next slide, one of the reasons that it was such a big change for us, and I imagine that many of you listening can relate to this, and one of the reasons it took so long to gain support from our executive team to make this change is that we have had a very traditional engagement survey, an annual survey in place for about 17 years. That was pretty much unchanged or minor changes over those 17 years. So the good news in that is that we already have a culture where people take our engagement survey very seriously. The challenge in that is that we had a lot and have a lot of change management ahead in terms of some of the big shifts that we want to make. So you can see the big from to shifts on this slide. Again, I bet some of this looks familiar to many of you out there, but we had an 87 question survey, which is painful for me to even say. It was very cumbersome, quite heavy. And so the shift that we're making is towards, or what we have gained approval to make in 2020, is a much lighter 12 question survey, a quarterly pulse survey, really accurately measuring engagement and also preparing a dashboard, allowing our people leaders to access a dashboard that's much more sophisticated and dynamic and able to get them the data they need in real time. So, like many of you, we had a plan for 2020. And if you can go to the next slide, we had our plan, then the pandemic hit, right? And so with that came a lot of challenges that many of you also faced. I think for us at Whirlpool, we have our EMEA headquarters, our European headquarters are in Milan, Italy. We also have locations in China and other parts of Asia. So we were impacted quite early, and that did allow us to react quickly in our other regions. But the other unique thing about Whirlpool that I will share is about 75% of our workforce is hourly employees who are in our plants. So overnight, we had to cope with both, a big portion of our workforce that was going remote overnight, but also having many employees in our plants who were on the front lines. And we operated many of our plants even early on in the crisis because our products like refrigerators and washing machines were deemed to be essential in helping people through the crisis. So a lot of challenges that we faced, like many of you. If you can go to the next slide. What we decided to do very quickly was to take a step back. So we had plans to launch a brand new engagement survey in 2020. We took a step back and we decided to pivot and take a different approach. So we really decided in the short term to launch a well-being pulse survey, and I'll share a bit more about that on the next slide. There were two main reasons that led to that decision to pause and to change our approach. One is that in March, the president of our European business came to us and said, I feel like we need to be asking for feedback from our employees right now. I need to know from them firsthand how we're handling the crisis and what they need us to do more of or to do differently. And so we had a big regional president coming to us and saying, we need to do this. We were not ready to do it, to be honest. We did not have everything up and running with Glint yet to do it, but we saw an opportunity to respond to that pull from the business. And the second main reason is that we wanted to send a very clear message to our employees that as the crisis was starting to unfold, their well-being was our top priority. So we really wanted to make that message clear, and we wanted to gather feedback on what are we doing to support your well-being and what would you need us to do differently? We were just acting on instinct alone, and we really needed to hear feedback so that we could ground our decisions in real data. So if we go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more about the details of what we did, what we've done, and how we've gotten to the point where we are today with our well-being pulse survey. So you can see along the top the timeline. We are a global business. And so what ended up happening, this was not our plan, but what ended up happening is we launched our well-being survey back in early April in our EMEA business, where, as I said, we had pull from a leader that we responded to. And then subsequently, we launched that same well-being survey, these 8 questions, in all of our global locations across regions. We did allow the regions to tell us what time frame would work best for them, because each country, each region was going through different stages of the crisis at different times. So we let the business units dictate the timing, but we did start to get much more appetite from the business to do this survey. And now I'm excited to share that we actually launched a second round of that well-being survey globally, everyone on the same time frame. It actually launched last week, and today is the last day of the survey, and we've had really strong participation in that survey. I will share that some leaders were excited to launch the Wellbeing Pulse survey, and others were perhaps a little bit resistant or reluctant. I think part of it is just a natural fear that I'm not quite sure if I ask for feedback right now, I'm not sure what I'm going to hear. Valid concerns. We were going through some difficult decisions around furloughs, mandatory furloughs, layoffs, etc. I think the thing that helped us get people on board is that we, in this case, did not focus too much on the score itself. We really focused on what we could learn from the trends in the data that was helpful that we could take action on. So that did help us gain some momentum. And in some cases, we learned that certain segments of our employee base needed more support than others, and we were able to respond to that very quickly. So if you can go to the next slide. The way that we ended up positioning our approach to gathering employee feedback, we really grounded it in both agility and resilience. And so I'll talk a little bit about both of these. On the agility side, we position this as, look, we need to be agile in the way that we are responding to this crisis. So we pivoted our approach. We focused on a specific aspect of engagement, that being well-being. And we need to continue to be agile. So that's why we're focusing on our new engagement survey approach next year, but we may continue to shift that approach over time, depending on what happens in our world and what the needs of the business are. And then resilience, we took a step back and actually looked at the design of the survey for our engagement survey that we had already designed and gained approval on, because we wanted to think about how can we actually measure the degree to which our teams and our organization are resilient, are set up to be resilient, so that we can manage crises like this in a crisis like this in the future. So we actually made some changes to our survey design so that we can actually measure some elements of resilience around decision making, challenging the status quo, empowering people, that we feel, and we partnered with our Glint People Science team to identify some items that we feel will help us measure that over the long term. So finally, I wanted to close by sharing a few learnings from this year. Many of us have many learnings from this year, but I chose 4. The first is that I think employees really appreciate being asked for feedback right now, probably more than ever. It's a way probably for them to feel that they have some control over the current situation that we're in and to express really what they need. So we did see some lift just in asking people for their feedback. The second is that, there was some fear about what's the feedback we're going to get right now. We were pleasantly surprised that early on, the feedback was very positive. And in fact, it still is more positive than you might expect, given what everyone is going through. I think, generally speaking, there's a lot of pride in the way that the company is responding and the support that people are feeling. That said, my third point here is that over time, we have seen employee feedback in specific areas start to trend a bit more negative, especially in the area of employee connection, which is not a surprise to us. And so we need to be able to respond well to that. And then the last point here that I'll make is we intentionally designed the survey such that our well-being survey, such that the results would primarily be shared with our senior leadership teams. In all honesty, it was partially because we weren't prepared to train all of our people leaders on the dashboard, on the Glint results dashboard yet. But we are hearing a lot of pull and interest from our people leaders, our frontline managers, to be able to get the feedback from their employees right now. And so that's something that we're continuing to explore and that we will certainly do early next year. So those are the learnings I wanted to share. Again, I look forward to hearing your questions and the discussion that follows. And Matt, I will turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Evan. Thanks for sharing your story and the learnings that you've had there. I wanted to highlight a couple of things that really stood out to me as you were talking. One, the shift to well-being, which is something I think we've seen across a lot of businesses over the last 6 to 10 months. And what a great message to send to employees, right? During this pandemic, our biggest focus from a people perspective is your well-being. And secondly, I love that you talked about the requests actually coming from the business, right? These feedback programs have traditionally been very HR driven, HR initiated, but the fact that you're actually hearing from leaders in the business saying, we really need to hear from our people right now is really inspiring. So thank you so much, Evan. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Kathy Tomlinson, who is the Organizational Effectiveness Evangelist. What a great title at Flexera. So Kathy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. So as Matt says, I am Kathy Tomlinson, Organizational Effectiveness Evangelist at Flexera. So I've been doing that job for them for about 4 years now. And the most important thing that I've learned during that time is that global employee engagement is hard won and really easily lost. So I found very quickly that a well-penned strategy is not enough. It takes a really combined effort from a team of relentlessly dedicated leaders to maintain culture and help the global team through change. So I'd love to walk you through our experiences now during that time. So just to tell you a little bit about Flexera. At Flexera, change is constant, so we move incredibly quickly. We're a B2B tech firm. We're headquartered in Itasca, just outside of Chicago, but our offices and our home workers, who we call Cloudies, are all over the world. And despite the obvious challenges of 2020, we have changed. We have acquired a new company. We have launched a new brand. We have been recognized as a leader in 2 technology areas by Gartner's Magic Quadrant. And that sort of thing, it doesn't happen without a really energized team of outstanding professionals. So we work hard to be an award-winning employer for employee experience. And the engagement survey is one of the ways that we track this. So just to show you a couple of our people strategy slides that we've pulled out from previous years, always the pulse has been very central. So we have adopted our strategy based on the feedback that we got. And we did notice that in 2018, we were undergoing a lot of changes within the team, and we kind of took our eye off the ball. So we put the engagement pulse on hold for 10 whole months, during which time we acquired 3 companies, 2 of them global. We announced that we were relocating offices, closing offices, changing corporate strategy, reorganizing reporting lines, and the changes were excellent. They were just what we needed. They were fundamental to the business, but they were absolutely overwhelming for a lot of our employees. And we did figure that out eventually when we asked them a year too late. So I'm going to show you what we found in October 2018. We were really shocked by our engagement pulse results, and we shouldn't have been. You know, in the space of 10 months, things had gone wildly off track. We had a 10-point drop in engagement, bigger drops elsewhere, 15 alerts just on our home screen. And we were really baffled because we'd done so much to develop the people function, and our team members, they weren't happy. So we had to sift through all of our scores. We had 2,500 comments to look at. And some of the issues that were highlighted were a complete miss. We simply weren't addressing the things that the employees needed. But a lot of them, a huge number of the complaints, were requests for things that we were already doing. So the pulse highlighted a huge gap in communication for us. We weren't connecting the dots for people. And our senior leadership team, particularly our chief exec, took this really seriously. So going forward, as well as having our managers look at their dashboards and come up with their own action plans, we made a really specific decision to redirect the leader circle. Give our leaders more responsibility to address global engagement and a commitment to monitor our process twice a year. And that's the journey that I'll walk you through now. So looking at January 2019, that was when we really got to work with using these results. So we pulled together our leader circle, who are a group of around 90 leaders from across the business. And we shared our concerns. We gave them the results and we asked them for their help. So we came up with a new agreement with our leader circle. It was pretty simple. We said, you can have more insight and more know-how on the running of the business, on the understanding that you take it back to your teams and you help them to connect the dots. So that kicked off a series of quarterly all-hands meetings with the leader circle, ad hoc meetings to give them previews of big announcements. And as you can imagine, having that system in place has been hugely successful this year when dealing with all the challenges of the pandemic. But the other key thing we needed was for them to help us fix this. So we asked them to participate in cross-functional projects to address the issues that had come up in the pulse. We called them micro teams. Every micro team would have a senior leadership team member to sponsor them. They'd have a lieutenant who was assigned to drive the project. They would have a subject matter expert to advise them. And then the rest of the team was made up of a nice, diverse, cross-sectional group of leaders to give real valuable input. And then we gave them really clear direction. We said, we are pulsing again in May. We expect to see an improvement. So you need to develop an action plan, meet regularly, communicate with the business what you're doing about it. There's going to be a readout to senior leadership in spring, and we will be back together in June, and we want to see how you've performed. So it was the first time we'd done anything like this, and when we got the results back in June, they were pretty good. They were pretty strong. So a lot of our teams had a very basic job on their hands because all they needed to focus on was communicating what we were doing. So it had a really immediate impact. Engagement came up 2 points globally. Every micro team saw at least a 1-point increase in their target scores, but some came up as many as 9 or 10 points. And the type of things they were doing were pretty straightforward. They were increasing communication on the company strategy, which saw a 6-point increase, increasing enablement and communication on customer satisfaction. We got a 4-point increase there. Introducing a mergers and acquisitions playbook for onboarding our acquired team members, so a 10-point increase in that area, and a business decision to assign a new vice president position to support acquisitions. So it made a big difference to us. But when we brought everyone together to look at the results, we also had an enablement opportunity for our leaders. So based on what we'd found through the pulse, we knew that change management was a really key need for us. So we ran a change management workshop, and again, it's had a huge impact on 2020. So terms like the change curve and the pulse of change, they've really been instrumental in helping our managers support their team members through everything that's happened this year. So when we got the results, the progress was so significant that we dropped some of the micro teams and we reformed around some of the key indicators that had come up in May. So we set up our new teams and we pulsed again later in the year in October to see how they'd done. And what we had lost in the blink of an eye in 2018, we were really slowly clawing back in 2019. So the score only came up 1 point for engagement in October, and we were still delighted because for an organization of our size, that's a strong move in the right direction. So just to tell you a little bit about the new micro teams, we then realized we needed a teams experience squad. So during the second half of the year, we pulled together a team to help us fix the issues we were having with using Microsoft Teams. We'd had it for almost a year and people were still saying things like, it's like a messy teenager's bedroom. I know what I'm looking for is in there, but I cannot find it amongst all the junk. So we, this time, adjusted a little. We had a few hangers on in the first half of the year. So now we asked people to self-select for the team that interested them. And it was the right call on this one because the team who fixed Microsoft Teams for us, they worked day and night around their usual role. They flew to head office, they locked themselves in rooms for days at a time, and they came up with a new approach to using Teams that has been a phenomenal success and had a huge impact on the way we work remotely this year. And another team that is definitely mentionable is our site leader team, our Epic Workspaces team. We have lovely offices. However, we had a lot of miscommunication about who owns the decision making in those offices, and you would be flabbergasted at how quickly engagement goes through the floor if the coffee machine breaks and nobody knows who's going to fix it. So we formally appointed a site leader for every location, and we gave them the project to determine their own scope of control over budget, safety, engagement, and loads of other factors at their site. And again, the site leader program has had a huge impact on how we've adapted this year. So if we look then at our May results, we actually held off on the pulse in Q2 this year, just to give us a little bit more time after moving to work from home and sadly reducing our team size to make sure that we could really capture employees' responses and reactions to the event. And having these micro teams in place, they helped us address them. So we took advice from the local site leader on how and when to close down the office. We leaned on our cloudy site leaders to train all our other managers on how to manage remotely. We already used Microsoft Teams for regular all hands. So when we moved them from quarterly to monthly to keep in touch with the business, they were still really interactive. We really had a good feel for what people wanted to know. So the scores have continued climbing. They actually jumped right up in May this year, but we remain cautiously optimistic because we do follow along with a lot of the Glint community guidance, and we were prepared for that grief-based gratitude effect. So we've pulsed again in the last couple of weeks just to make sure that we're maintaining that engagement level and those expectations while people are still working from home. But like I say, we've pulsed. This is an ongoing journey. So the next steps for us are to see what information we gathered. So we still have a career micro team. That's the one that we're still holding on strong to because they're so important to us. We've introduced new questions this time on diversity, belonging, and inclusion. And of course, we have a really nice process in place now where the senior leadership team and the HR business partners all work really closely to really deep dive into the results we get. So anything new that we find, we're looking forward to pursuing it. But just to wrap up, we have increased engagement. It has had a huge impact on how we've adapted to things. It's been great for the company. But one of the huge successes that I absolutely love about this program is the change in mindset that it's brought for our leadership team, because it is now clearly and universally understood at Flexera that if you want to be a leader and you want to be on the leadership team, you have to be ready to work on the business and not just in the business. And that's been a really, really great journey for us. So that's us, that's our team. Hand you back to Matt.
Thanks. So what a great story. Again, I always highlight a couple of things that jumped out for me, Kathy, as you were talking. You said something that I want to double down, which is the importance or the impact of straightforward actions. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by employee feedback that, gosh, we've got to come up with a big new idea that's going to solve these. But actually, sometimes going back to the basics, remembering that sometimes people just want to be over communicated with or have the basics communicated to them, can have a really big impact. So I loved that point from your presentation. And the second thing that I really enjoyed was the balance of selecting people to fix an issue. So, your leaders circle, you gave them a very clear mandate that we need to understand communications and why it's falling down and why our engagement scores are dropping. But also the balance of allowing people to self-select the things that they're interested in. When people have a vested interest, people are frustrated with Microsoft Teams, as you said, actually challenging them with sorting out what's going on can have a really big impact. So thanks so much. We've had lots of questions coming in during your presentation, so I'm really excited to get to some audience Q&A. And do keep the questions coming. Good 20-25 minutes to answer your questions. So the first question I'm going to start off with, Devon, is for you. We had a lot of questions about how do we act on survey results. So this one in particular, we are moving towards frequent pulse surveys. We have many leaders that they haven't had enough time, 4 months, to address results from the last survey. How have you helped your leaders become comfortable with more frequent surveys?
Sure, I can definitely relate to that challenge, and we do hear quite a bit of that feedback, or we have heard quite a bit of that feedback over the last few months. In fact, in our North America business, we launched a well-being survey in July, and then end of July, early August, and now we are launching another well-being survey, at the end of October, early November. So it's just 3 months. They do feel like that's a pretty short time to be able to react to the feedback. I think one thing that we can do to help them be comfortable with that is to really spend the time to understand the data through the dashboard and prioritize their actions very, very carefully. They're not going to be able to come up with a 15-point action plan. They're really going to have to come up with the 1 or 2 biggest actions that they think are going to make an impact. And then perhaps there might be specific employee segments that they can prioritize as well. So for us, for example, in some parts of our business, we saw much lower well-being feedback from some of our employee segments who are out in the field. Our hourly populations in the plants and specific plants, our field technicians who are going into customers' homes to repair equipment. We did see lower results for them. And so we really focused our effort on those employee groups where we saw, their well-being had dipped and, they needed special attention and support right now. So I think the best advice I can give there is to help leaders feel comfortable that they can't solve it all. They can't solve it all in 3 months or 6 months, maybe even 12 months. So that's why we need to use the data to help us prioritize as much as possible.
Thanks, Deb. I completely agree. We often talk about just asking leaders to take one simple step forward. These laundry lists of action plans never work. We never do them all, but one simple thing. Kathy, anything that you can add from your perspective of Flexera about helping people take action, particularly when you're surveying more frequently?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting really watching Devon's presentation. It's really good. And I was noticing the differences between ours. And honestly, when I volunteered to participate in this conversation, I wasn't sure Glint would want me because we're not best practice. We do it twice a year. We don't do it 4 or 5 times a year. And we did try that. We tried it with our managers and they weren't comfortable with the frequency. They weren't comfortable with having a different combination of questions each time, and you got to take whatever wins you can get. So we went for a longer survey twice a year and we've gotten really good engagement. So I'm still hopeful that we'll walk them back in that direction. But because we've created a framework that they're comfortable with, we then get a lot of buy-in with them for the action planning and the action setting. And I'm incredibly lucky that I have a fantastic HR business partner team that I get to partner with, and they work directly with the business. They know what their needs are. They can really interpret the data and help guide them towards good action plans, which in as many cases as possible, we communicate the action plans, because just like Devon was saying, when you ask people their opinion, the engagement jumps up. When we tell people what we're working on, we see that it has a really huge impact. But one of our business partners came up with a fantastic idea for secret recognition this year. So they have a secret action plan around recognition, because it would seem a bit disingenuous if they started to say, hey, we're going to tell you how great you are every week. So they're just doing it on the down low, and it's working incredibly well. It's great.
I love that. I think that's the first time I've heard secret action plans. But love it. Great. I see lots of questions in the chat about action. So thank you for your perspective. I think this is a topic we can also bring up in our Ask the People Science session later on today. We're going to be putting some of our Glintsters and some of our LinkedIn partners in the hot seat to answer some questions. So we'll also ask them about what they've seen in terms of driving action in organizations. Lots of other questions coming in. Let me just take this one down. Start another one. Kathy, I have one for you here. Kathy, you mentioned acquisition of several global companies. How have you shifted or changed your culture from an us versus them to we us mindset? And how is this culture change reflected in your engagement questions, your results, and action?
That's again a really good question. We were actually, when our scores dropped in October 2018, that was one of the ones that was really on the floor. So we'd had a few acquisitions very quickly, and honestly, productivity-wise, we hadn't missed a beat. The new teams were really talented, and they'd really gotten to grips right away. But from the workforce perspective, we found that people didn't feel on a personal level or on a product level that we had a really clear integration strategy. So it's made a big difference. We split it into 2 questions, and we had 2 different micro teams, one based on product integration because we're a technology company, one focused on people integration. And the action that we've taken is based on the comments then. You've got to really dive into what's going wrong there, where are the gaps, what's missing. And we've come up with some really good integration approaches, like bringing everybody into head office, assigning them a buddy, having brown bag lunches, getting really connected with the new team members. We've even changed the way we approach their roles and where they fit in, and how much we disperse them amongst existing teams, and how much we encourage the local site to share their best practices so the other site leaders can learn from them. So a lot of our micro teams actually have a really good knock-on effect with one another. And I think as part of our micro team approach, when we brought them all together for that midpoint readout to the senior leadership team, they saw a lot of those opportunities to cross-pollinate their projects. So it's definitely work in progress, because we're a company that really leans into M&A. So it's something that we want to continue to grow, but that's the journey that we started. But anyway.
Great. Thanks, Kathy, so much. Okay, keep the great questions coming. Let me scan through what else we've asked here. Devon, can you share more detail on how you're measuring resilience in your employee feedback surveys?
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad to share a bit more about that. Just to be clear, we haven't started that survey yet. So we focused on our well-being pulse survey throughout 2020, and that's what we're still focused on this month and next month. We'll be launching our first quarterly pulse survey that has some stable questions each quarter and some rotating questions each quarter. We'll be starting that in early Q1. But what we did, we partnered with our people science team, and we took kind of a fresh look at the questions that we had in our survey. And our people science consultants kind of encouraged us to take a look at some of the questions that that the research would show are related to resilient teams and resilient organizations. So, for example, how are decisions made? Is it clear who has the decision rights? You'll get some interesting feedback around the pace of decisions and the level of involvement up the hierarchy and things like that. We also added a question around empowerment. Do employees feel empowered in their work to make decisions? Key to resilience. We also added a question around, do I feel comfortable that I can challenge the existing status quo or the process? So what we did was, I think we removed 3 or 4 questions actually, and we prioritized those 3 or 4 questions that I mentioned that we think will really help us get some important feedback on how resilient we are, both within individual teams and then broadly as an organization. But we haven't gathered that feedback yet. It'll start early next year.
Wonderful. I'm sure that'll be really exciting insights to get on how the business and how individuals are doing in that topic of resilience. It seems to be something that's coming up more and more, whether it be around organizational resilience, or even just how individuals are feeling in the middle of everything that's been going on in 2020, right? Making sure that employees feel that they have the tools, the skill set, the support that they need to get through challenging times. So definitely a great topic to be considering in your employee feedback programs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a question that I came in for Devon, but I'd love to get both of your perspectives on. Devon, maybe we'll start with you. Do you have any advice for bringing on the leaders who are resistant for employee feedback during change? You mentioned in your presentation that you had some people asking for it, but some people saying that actually this is not the time to ask. What advice do you have?
Yeah, great question. So for us, I'll share a couple things. I mean, the first thing I would say is you kind of want to listen to those leaders and understand where they're coming from, right? To try to understand what is their underlying concern or fear, what's the barrier that's making them either not interested or not open to this. So I do think if you can even engage them in a conversation just to hear their perspective, that's helpful. Now, sometimes you can't even get to that point. So that's fair. I do think for us, what helped is that if you have even a single leader in your organization who has some level of influence and is on the senior leadership team or even a couple layers down from the most senior team, use them to your advantage, right? Help them start asking questions within their leadership teams to say, hey, I was nervous about what I would hear too, for obvious reasons, right? People are going through a lot right now. But if we don't ask, we don't know. We don't know how to take action on the feedback. So I think the other thing that helped us is really think critically about what are some of the patterns in behavior that maybe aren't serving us as well as they could. So for us at Whirlpool, we definitely had and still have a bit of a pattern around evaluation and kind of scoring ourselves, right, on on engagement. And to some degree, the score kind of became the end goal, became the end of the whole experience, instead of the data and the results actually being the start of the experience, actually sparking conversation and helping us be curious about, well, why are we seeing the results that way? And what should that cause us to look into more? And so I think what we did differently with the well-being surveys is we were very intentional about not focusing as much on the score and comparing businesses across different parts of the regions or different functions. We really treated it more as trying to be curious about what can we learn from this and what can we do differently. So I think if you can think about some of the habits maybe that have formed over time and how can you be intentional in helping people change some of those habits, that's a good place to start.
Thanks, Devin.
I'd love to hear Kathy's view as well.
Yeah, me too. Kathy, any experience with leaders who may be a little resistant to getting feedback?
Oh yeah, I can 100% relate, Devin. You have some people who are absolute stars and they're so engaged with the process, and then you have other people who just don't see the purpose. They have day jobs, they've got a lot of other responsibilities, and we're competing for their attention with this. So very similar approach. I think we come at it from a couple of angles. One is, what's in it for me? So as a manager, why do I want this information? Why do I want this data? And one of the areas that we try and come at that really positively is we hold up these shining examples. We get reports from Glint of which managers have been most frequently in their dashboard, who's using their action plans, and we hold them up at all hands. And it's not a focus on who's got the best scores. It's a focus on who is using the information, who is talking to their teams, how are they using it? And we're really holding those up as examples of great behavior. And then the other side of it is we are role modeling it from the top down, and we're having every manager held accountable by their manager. So when they come to their biannual check-in with their manager will say, how are your manager effectiveness scores? So because we only do it twice a year, we ask the manager questions both times. And we use the aggregate feature within the pulse to pull together all the manager related ones, which demonstrate not that the manager says they do their management things, that the team says that they're having team meetings, that they're valuing people's input, that they're remembering to recognize. And if the manager has the information, they can have that conversation. But if they have more than 5 team members and they didn't get a dashboard because their team members didn't take the pulse, the question then is your team disengaged? Is there an issue here? What do we explore? So we're so lucky to have that support from the senior level, that we have those guys role modeling the behavior down. And then of course we're pushing the behavior up and helping those managers have team conversations.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for both of your perspectives there. Kathy, I love what you said about identifying the managers that are getting into their actions and using the data. But not as a way to kind of embarrass people, but stories, right? We actually had a great that Katie hosted yesterday on storytelling, and that has been one of the most impactful things that we've seen across organizations to overcome resistance, right? If we can shine a light on the parts of the organization that are doing great things and stress the impact that it's having, that's when we'll bring So I think that really resonates with a lot of the things that you both were saying. So thanks so much. Okay. Devin, you spoke about the well-being pulse and moving from relying on instincts to getting data about how employees were feeling. Any examples of surprising insights in that process?
Yeah. So I would say one of the biggest surprises is that we did see pockets of our employee base that had even lower scores than we were expecting. It wasn't across the board, but we saw bigger variations than we were expecting in some parts of the business. So like I said, our field technicians, for example, in some countries, early on in the crisis, you can imagine they were they were going into people's homes. They didn't always have even the personal kind of protective equipment that they needed to feel safe. And that was honestly very hard to hear because we did not know that that was happening. We had a lot of feedback as well from employees in our plants who were feeling like early on, in some cases, maybe the safety protocol wasn't as clear as we thought it was. And they weren't feeling safe. They weren't feeling like the communication was as clear or as coordinated as it needed to be. So there were definitely some surprises that I know our leaders took very seriously. In fact, there were some calls where, I think, in fact, they were embarrassed to hear the feedback because they did not realize that they were issues that our employees were experiencing today. So again, those are moments where you kind of have to reassure them that that's why we're doing this. That's why we're asking. We're trying to uncover some of the maybe unique challenges that employees deeper in the organization in these pockets are feeling. And for whatever reason, it's not bubbling up to the people who can make some immediate changes to keep people safe and feeling supported. So yes, we did have some surprises. One other example I'll give is that in our EMEA region, where we operate in many different countries, many different countries were experiencing the crisis at different points in time, right? And every country had different, quarantine and regulations and different communications that were coming out from different sources. It was very confusing early on in particular. And so some of the feedback we got in that early April survey in Europe was, we don't know what source to pay attention to. We don't know where to go. What's the single source of truth for me to know as an employee what I need to do to keep myself and my team safe? They didn't know. They were overwhelmed, right? And so that was really critical feedback for us to get early on, and that helped us in some of our other regions as well.
Great. Kathy, how about you? Any surprises that you've seen in your survey feedback? I know you mentioned it was perhaps a surprise or one that you should have expected, that the scores went down after a while, but any surprises that have helped you generate insights and take action within Flexera?
Yeah, I think along similar lines to what Devon's experienced, it's finding out where there's misunderstandings or miscommunication or a lack of support. You can't know just by running the business. People all over the world in different teams with different managers have very different experiences. So just a couple of examples of things that really knocked me sideways were, we have unlimited paid time off in North America, and we don't have that in the UK. And I think that that's an amazing benefit, but we've had plenty of comments saying, I now feel like I'm not sure how much time off I can take. And it's affecting people's work-life balance in the opposite direction to what it was supposed to be. And that's just a management enablement thing. It's just a making sure that the messaging between the manager and the employee of expectations is there and it's the right thing. Sometimes people feel in pockets of the organization that the goal setting process is too complicated and it's too much of a stretch. How am I going to achieve this? And we need to go back and spend time with those managers and make sure that they're using the tools we've given them to provide the consistent employee experience. So it's been incredibly useful to us from that regard. But I must admit, everything comes as a surprise. I make all these predictions every single time we do it. I predict how it's going to shake out, and I'm always surprised by which ones are stronger and which ones are weaker.
It's amazing sometimes how this feedback can reinforce what you expect and then throw out these surprises in the middle of nowhere, but actually they can give you some really clear direction on what to do to make employees feel happier and more supported. Okay, I think we're going to move to our final question. And Kathy, this one's for you. You mentioned micro teams and site leaders. Do you see these as a bridge between employee engagement results and the employee experience?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is just one way that we're approaching it because we realized that we had some global issues that needed addressing. We still deal with things directly with line managers at the team level. We still do things for each senior leadership team member and their org and what their organization is experiencing right now. But yeah, the micro teams are directly there to help address global concerns, but we really hype them up. So we really make sure that everybody knows we heard you, this is what we heard, this is what we're going to do about it, this is who's working on it, so you can contact them with your input. And more than ever before, with this career micro team, we are then picking people up as we go. So it's definitely spread way beyond the leader circle. And any manager who has shown good movement on the career score, we loop them in. Any employee who raises their hand for more exposure, and we're like, hey, well, kill two birds with one stone. We loop them in and we have them test things for us and try them out. So they've really kind of outgrown just the pulse and just the people team, but we love that. It very much lives within the business.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions. So Devin, Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your stories today, your insights, your learnings, which I'm sure a lot of people have taken some good takeaways from. I certainly learned a lot from you both today. So thanks a lot. And I will now hand it over to Katie to tell us what's up next.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to Kathy and Devin again. Great engaging session. So now we're going to jump into a break, but we've got a really fun treat for you if you're willing to stick around. If you go to your agenda, you can find a link for a trivia session, which is going to start right now. So if you're looking for some fun, want to answer some questions about geography, pop culture, and just take your brain away, join us for that. Otherwise, we'll see you back here at 30 past the hour to talk about measuring and expanding on progress. We'll see you then.
Mimecast's mission is to help customers secure their employees' data, their reputation, their intellectual property, and their customers' data.
So our strategy is really around how do we help customers become more cyber resilient, starting with email security at the core and building out from that.
While it's a technology solution, we really see ourselves playing a key role in society.
Our entire operating model globally is now oriented towards delivering legendary customer success.
It's the idea of we are going to go above and beyond for our customers' needs, and we're going to make sure that they're happy at the end of the day.
What we've done at Mimecast is we've mapped the customer journey, and we've identified 13 key touch points along the customer journey, and we measure how we're doing at each of those key touch points. And I think what Glint gives us is the equivalent for our employees.
One of the great things about Glint is that it provided a very easy way of communicating the data.
The HR business partner historically didn't have as much information at their fingertips, and with the addition of Glint, we now have a lot of information that we can use to help the business leaders plan.
The biggest change at Mimecast since we adopted Glint is the insight and the ability for us to launch initiatives to dramatically improve employee engagement.
And I think if you have an engaged workforce and a workforce that enjoys working together and has fun together, you're going to see better results.
One of the features of Glint that we really like is the comments bubble, and that they are coded. They give an indication of where to focus.
It's not just a number, it's the employees telling us what they really feel.
Let's be honest, not everything we read about in our Glint surveys is sort of happy reading. But then once you take it all in and you realize it's that tough stuff that we learn the most from, that's actually what makes our organization better.
What came through on one of the Glint surveys was that people were feeling very disconnected from the strategic vision for both customer operations and the business. So we doubled down on better communication, and that has made a world of difference. Now, when we get the feedback on the Glint surveys, people are saying they're feeling much more connected.
So ensuring that our employees are happy and feel like they have a career here and that they can do their job successfully pays for itself tenfold.
I think being a part of that culture of engagement and collaboration, it makes Mimecast a really super special place to work.
And if you don't know, now you know.
And cut.
Cut.
Hi there, and welcome back. My name is Matt Rodden. I am the head of People Science Consulting for North America at Glint, proudly wearing my Glint flag today, and really happy to be your moderator for this next session. We've had a great couple of days already. We're right in the middle of our sessions, and it's my pleasure to introduce some great speakers. I've had a sneak peek of their content and just want to highlight a few themes that really jumped out to me. Number one was the theme of connection. So the idea of connecting your people success programs to broader business strategy, the things that your leaders, your managers, your employees really care about. And the second theme that really jumped out for me was how organizations can use employee feedback to shape what we do as an organization, rather than thinking of employee feedback as a reaction to what we do as an organization. So being much more proactive in the way that we use that feedback. So with that in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeremy Robinson, who is the Vice President of Organizational Effectiveness, and Annalise Santos, who is the Manager of the Team Member Experience at Advent Health. Jeremy and Annalise, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's a privilege for Annalise and myself to share a small part of our organizational journey over the last few years, especially this year. On behalf of Advent Health and our amazing leaders and team members and physicians and our entire workforce, just want to say thank you for the opportunity. This year has definitely been incredible, challenging, and so many other ways to describe it, I know for all of us, and same thing goes here for Advent Health. And it's been inspiring as well as we've been able to partner together. So many of us have faced fear and anxiety, but our focus has been that together as a team, we can be and are incredible. And so this has been our theme this year. Together, we are incredible and we can do amazing things together. So before we highlight one of the things we've done during this unique year to listen, we partnered with Glenn over the last few years, doing 3 times a year full census pulses of our team members. But we've done something unique this year. Before we do that, though, I thought it'd be helpful to briefly share our company culture and brand journey over the last 2 to 3 years that sort of sets up nicely for our focus for this year. You can see here's a high-level overview of who we are as an organization. We're a nonprofit, faith-based organization with a mission of extending the healing ministry of Christ. And some of our facilities have been around since 1908 or earlier in terms of sanitariums and health-focused healthcare. And we continue that tradition moving forward. You can see the states we're in, fairly large organization, 60,000 fully employed team members. You can expand that to 80,000 plus if you look at some of our joint operating agreements. Everything from acute care, non-acute, post-acute, the full continuum of a clinical care company. In 2018, a couple of years ago, we started on a journey to say, how do we go from being a loosely affiliated healthcare organization with many different brands and names on buildings and approaches to care and even service, how we approach consistent quality service. And we started to align around one brand promise, and one cultural approach. And the name was Advent Health. And so as we started to move towards that name, we knew we had to start with our team members. And with that, we wanted to make sure that every team member knew who we were, where we were going, and their part to help us get there. And so as we take a look at this next slide, I'd share with you that this was quite a journey for us to understand our cultural framework and who we were, from just like any organization, our mission, our vision, our values, and how we show up to work every day and bring our mission to life. And through several conversations and design sessions and focus group sessions, we were able to align around this common cultural framework for the first time in our history. And really the magic of it was getting to the service standards, which is a way how we were able to tell every team member how we were able to bring our mission to life, both in terms of how they experienced whole person care, but also how they delivered whole person care to the communities that we serve. And so the simplicity of keep me safe, love me, make it easy, and own it became a rallying cry and alignment phase for us to say, this is who we are, and this is how we show up for each other and for our communities, our patients, and our consumers. Like Twila and Amy shared earlier, and I captured earlier where they shared, we were able to shift mindsets by using different words. And we felt that our service standards really helped us to do that, to shift the mindset. We took 4 hours with every team member through an experiential learning map session to tell them again who we are, where we're going, what our service standards are. And we took 60,000 people through that in 6 months back in 2018. So 2019 hit, we launched our new brand and our brand promise of Feel Whole, we are Advent Health. And then came 2020, right? And so the question was then in 2020, what is it we're going to do to show up for each other? When COVID emerged earlier this year, it was a great test and challenge for us to see if we are who we say we are and who we're striving to be as an organization. Just like you and your organizations, this challenged every person, every family, at work, at home, and our communities to think about how we show up for each other. And in the midst of the chaos and the confusion and the real-time updates and safety protocols and CDC guidelines and everything else we were adapting to, I can't say enough about how our team and our leaders stepped up. But one of the questions we were asking ourselves during that time is, how do we stay in touch real time with the experience of our team members? How do we stay in touch with them to know if the service standards that we've said they will experience are actually how they're feeling at the front line? And so we started to take a couple different ideas and boil it down to say, how do we do the following? How could we launch an always-on crisis feedback survey on the Glint platform with just a few requirements, and that is keep it short, it's got to be connected to our service standards, it's got to drive practical, realistic, meaningful feedback, and at our highest level, our senior executives need to have real-time access and be able to drive those results as well. So pretty simple challenge, right? Now I'll hand it off to Annalise to take us through the approach that we took.
So how could anyone in our organization easily access and provide feedback? One of our service standards is make it easy, and so that is important to us. So team members had access to the survey via our central location, Advent Health Connect SharePoint site for all things coronavirus. So found on the front page where thousands of team members were going in regularly for updates, process adjustments, and information real time. It's also the same place where they go to find resources to take care of themselves, information on PPE and employee health, mental health resources, and etc. Well, now that we had an easy place for us to, for team members to go and find the survey, where can they share feedback? Let's take a look at the feedback tool and how it was designed for leaders to take action on. As Jeremy said, this is who we are, our service standards, and how we plan to take action accordingly to ensure that we are living up to that promise. So results were a standing agenda item in initially twice in a week system command centers, and they still are months later shared weekly. There was also a focus on the ease of access, as Jeremy mentioned, to review results on a leader's personal mobile device. Well, as an organization, initially, Keep Me Safe, we found was the lowest scoring item. And so we took initiative, we focused all our efforts on communicating supply chain efforts, specifically for PPE. And then Love Me switched and became the lowest scoring question. And all facilities then focused their efforts there, and so on and so on. Well, now I invite you to grab your blanket, your hot chocolate. Katie, I'm going to tell you a story. One of our HRBPs from one of our regions shared that her executive team was disheartened at initial results showing such low scores for their facility, and they were the lowest score in their region. This was not acceptable to them because they knew their facility, they were proud of their culture, the camaraderie. So the leadership team knew that they had to do something. Action must occur to repair the camaraderie, to repair the relationships between the team members. From the comments received, communication and leadership were topics that were key, as well as providing adequate PPE. So the complaints were primarily around safety and transparency. Our team members were not feeling safe. They were not feeling loved. And so Elizabeth, the HRBP, began to share results from the survey with the Incident Command Center daily. She would also relay the information back to all directors. Well, they focused on connecting with team members, executive visibility, transparency in communication, and ensuring that the facility had enough PPE. Unfortunately, there were still rumors that we were asking team members to share PPE. So it was a challenge to communicate, but Elizabeth shared that the clinical teams, the clinical leaders were highly effective in that challenge. Well, the outcome? Leaders took results from the survey personally, and the data, while at times it was difficult to bear, became a motivating factor.
Thank you so much, Annalise. Kudos to Annalise for her tremendous work on this tool and for our partnership with Glint to launch it quickly and be able to share it across the organization. Just one other quick note to add. It was reminded to me just how meaningful the action was that was being taken and how personal it was for our executive team when our CEO for our Southwest region in Texas picked up the phone and called me and said, I'm on my phone, I'm in the results. How do I compare this week's to last week's to know how we're doing and where we've made progress? And it was that impactful across our system and across every region to be able to listen to it and take action. So it truly has been an incredible year for us. And this is just one example of how we've been able to take action on results and listen to the experience of our team members to make sure that who we say we are and the experiences we want our team members to have is actually what they're having as well. So based on all of this work and all of the feedback, we've actually launched an incredible campaign around Humans Are Incredible into our markets to inspire and bring hope to our communities, not just our team members, but our patients and their families as we continue to go through this together. This listening tool we've shared with you, it's been so impactful that our executive team has asked us to continue it through the end of the year as we continue to monitor and take action on these results. Ultimately, our goal is to be able to celebrate the people that deliver care, the people in our communities, and inspiring our communities to remind themselves of what it takes and what makes each person incredible. So just in closing, really appreciate the chance to share today and the opportunity to share with you what our brand promises look like this year, this commitment to each person feeling whole. And look forward to staying connected with you and the broader Glint community as we share together and highlight just all the incredible ways each of us bring our personal and company missions to life every day. Thank you again.
Jeremy, Annalise, thank you so much. What a powerful story, particularly when we think about the importance of the work that your organization does. We think about essential workers on the absolute front line of this pandemic. Really appreciate you sharing your story today and some of the things that you have been working on. A couple of things that really stood out to me as I was writing notes as you were talking there. The first thing that jumped out to me was the thing you said around during times of crisis. That's really when you get to show who you say you are. And the fact that you've used this year, this is an opportunity to say, this is an incredible year. This is an opportunity for us to inspire, to be positive, to bring hope, was really inspiring. And I think this also brings me on to the second thing that jumped out to me, which is this theme of words matter. Annalise, the words that you use there, the idea of shifting mindsets with words. I love the service standards and how simple and powerful you've kept them to bring people along. And I also love how you tied that so directly to the survey content. Really fantastic stuff. So thank you so much for sharing this story. We're going to move on to our second presentation in this section, and I'm really excited to introduce Sandra Dillon, who is the Vice President of Talent Development at Chimera. Sandra, I'm going to hand it over to you. Like audio. So I think we're going
to get started together, and let me tell you a little bit about Chimera, and let me tell you a little bit about the work that I do and where the Glint technology has been supporting our work. There's a little bit of time delay. I'm not sure if the slides are now sharing. Get started together, and let me tell you a little bit about Chimera, and let me tell you a little bit about the work that I do and where the Glint technology has been supporting our work. There's a little bit of time delay. I'm not sure if the slides are not sharing. Okay, good. So apologies, there is some delay. So maybe starting out, my own work is in talent development, and what that means is I lead the succession planning and also talent management at Chimera. And part of that role is actually also looking after, obviously, our continuous listening and our feedback model. So as a company, this slide really represents or tells the story is that we are a global company. We are primarily a manufacturing company, and we aspire to be a great product company. So from that perspective, maybe the highlights are that we have over 60 manufacturing operations, sales in over 100 countries, and 5,000 employees. We're very committed to sustainability, and you'll see today when I talk about sustainability how important that has been for us in this journey with Glint. So maybe to mention on the sustainability targets, we have obviously set a carbon neutrality by 2045, and also to mention that we're fully committed to the Paris Agreement. Okay, secondly then, I want to kind of talk about our model. So our model itself is very much about digital. It's also about having the data and the dashboards available to the managers. And thirdly, it is really about the ACT framework. And for those of you who don't know the ACT framework, this is something that we have learned with Glint, and it's based on the acknowledging where we're at, collaborating together, and taking action. And it's been really powerful. And when I tell you about our journey and our story today, I want to kind of show you how we have made the practical examples here of taking action. So this is based on Glint best practice. And apologies now, there is a little bit of delay with the webcast. So if the slides need to catch up or I'm a little bit behind, please in your webcast, please appreciate that. So now let's really look at where are we coming from, or where did we start our journey? And maybe to begin with, that our journey starts with that we were very happy with where we were progressing with surveys, and we had been starting surveying biennial basis since 2013. But what we realized was that it was very I suppose, how would you say, backwards looking rather than forward and futuristic, and quite traditional methods, and very heavy, I would say, process planning and project planning. And the other thing, now that we are looking at kind of trying to work with data in mind, the data for the surveys and the pulses were in different places. So very difficult to do analysis and quite manual. You stepped forward to just before we started working with Glint, and our aspiration was that we wanted to be an early adopter. And what that meant is we wanted to move to the future, and we wanted to become more agile. So to do that, we really had this aspiration that we wanted to put the data into the hands of the managers to take the action. We wanted to be forward-looking, we wanted to be improving, and we were okay to be learning and improving. So this was the basis upon which we decided to move to this model. And again, the strong emphasis was on learning and improving. So then, if we look at what this means in practice, for us as an organization, this has meant that we have set up a kind of a three-tier or a three-prong approach to pulsing our employees. The first piece is looking at the automation. So we have tried to follow the life cycle, and in the first instance, we have moved to automating the onboarding pulses, which go to new hires after 90 days. So this was a big win for us, saving time and also efficiently in relation to acting on those results. The second is our engagement pulse, which I mentioned earlier was biennial before we started working with Glint. And pre-COVID, the plan was to at least be surveying on engagement twice, maybe possibly more. So we were agreeing the cadence, and that was pre-COVID. In 2020, we have had to look at this differently, but we'll come to that shortly. So my engagement, or the engagement pulse, is my voice, and it became branded that way, and employees could clearly see. And this was the big program where we made it very aligned with our strategy and business outcomes. And the third part of the process, or our capability, is very much about on-demand pulsing. And what this is different here is that we consider the Glint capability, which I'm leading that for the organization, but I consider to be an organization-wide capability. So when a business needs to pulse the organization or the employees or an employee segment, we sit together with our team in talent development and with the organization, and the owner of the process becomes the owner of the survey, and we work together to develop an on-demand pulse. So the main point here, I suppose, is that we try to make it easy for our stakeholders, both the people who are receiving the results, as well as the main person who wants to gather this information and this feedback and sentiment from our employees. Here you can see very much what it means in practice. So we have a central calendar. And again, as I mentioned, from a governance point of view, I'm leading that with a small team. So it has meant we're resource efficient, but this is based again on the Glint best practice of having one central calendar. And what that means is for us is that we are able to pulse pretty quickly, and we are able to plan, and we're able to use the ACT framework to take the action. And what that has meant in practice for 2020 is we have continued with the plans, and we were able to also survey all employees once this year already. Now we have a live engagement pulse, and we then have also pulsed other people during this period. What I would say is the real benefit of having the central calendar is that it avoids survey fatigue. The next element then is that we start to look now at the trends. And from a trends point of view, we start to see the very much around our engagement. So I'm just getting a flag now that we're having technical issues. So I understand we are jumping straight to the panel discussion. So back over to you in the team. Very good. Okay. So now I'm getting a flag to keep going. Sorry about this, the 3 technologies at the moment. So we're good to keep going. That's great. So if we look then at the trends, so I mentioned earlier that sustainability is very important. And what that means is that in 2016, we set a sustainability target. And then we put that sustainability target around people and integrity from 2016 to 2020. And we used then, when we joined with Glint in 2019, we moved to the new methods. What's different is we were able, like I mentioned earlier, to move from biennial to regular pulsing on various topics that were relevant. But what was consistent is the engagement pulse. And you can see here from the data that we have exceeded our sustainability target from a business outcomes. That's really a celebration. And now we are in the top 20 of Kemira's customer base. And now, as I mentioned, we have a current My Voice survey live, which gives us the trends indeed. And we will have those by when the survey closes in early December. What I would say here, I suppose, is that then we start to look at really the crux of the presentation today is to say, so what? You have all this pulsing capability. How do you take action? So central to having it being a central calendar, and the fact that it's really important to listen to our employees, like our previous speakers, is that we have to be prepared to do something. So we have really been identifying what are the key themes, what are the elements related to looking at what's important, what's driving engagements, what is the sentiment, where is the advocacy, where are we having the challenges. And this is an example I've illustrated here in my own role and the team's role in talent development. So we've chosen some items left to right. We know, in fact, there is something like a 26-point difference in engagement between those who believe we will take action and those who believe we won't. So we know action taking is really meaningful. If we go to the right and in the kind of the light pink or light red area, this is showing you some of the key items that we've agreed both with the business and HR that we're going to focus, because you can't do everything. And what's really nice and meaningful about the ACT framework is it makes you focus on a few. So we have focused on design thinking, collaborating with our employees and our managers, and also working closely with our executives and our board of directors to make this very meaningful. What are we hearing? How do we respond? And this frame is giving you an example of where we're fine to say this is what we're doing. Actually, we're trying to celebrate the wins, learn from the lessons, and move on. Not over. It's probably something in our culture that we do celebrate, but then we're also, I would say, quite humble about this is a statement in time and it's a point. Then we come to we are really focused on taking action aligned with the business outcomes, and that's really important. So to have the credibility, we need to do that. So then we come to the main takeaways, and what I want to probably share with you are a few highlights. First of all, from a lessons learned point of view, of course, everything is not perfect. But one of the things we learned at this stage is that you need to have some kind of governance. And I mentioned earlier that we have a central calendar, and then we have to, I suppose, agree and discuss and have that central calendar. One, to avoid survey fatigue, but also to make sure that anything we are going to ask, we have to make a commitment to follow through. And that's really important. And sometimes we push back and we say, this is not the right time to ask this if you're not in a position to act. So that's the first point. Secondly, then I would say that we're sharing the results. This was a big win for us. We were having the top-down approach. And when we moved to Glint, we made a commitment. Everybody gets the results at the same time within typically 24 hours, unless we have some reason and some valid reason for that. So that was moving from a week to 2 to 3 weeks sharing previously to now it's pretty instant. And of course, that was a bit nerve-wracking, but it went well, and it's now something that's our way of working. The other thing here is the ACT framework is about simplicity, and we try to work with the rule of thumb of about 90 days, because you can do a lot in a quarter. And then you see, let's see how we're moving and how we're trending. And also taking back to the life cycle, a lot can happen in a quarter. So we try to increase the element of ownership with the managers. Then I would probably want to say a little bit about the data. We're a very data-based decision-making company, and we wanted that credibility from a HR perspective. We have integration with our HRIS system, so we're dealing with real-time data. Now we are dealing with real-time sentiment, and we're able to act with the data in one place. So that's very powerful. And the artificial intelligence helping the action taking, the resources from Glint and vis-a-vis LinkedIn, they're very powerful. That's something that a small team can't do. But when we do that, we have the credibility and the best practice. The other elements here are probably to say to you that when you're linking it and business alignment, it can be about the strategy. We had a survey about the COVID. We had 3,000 people working remotely. With the help of Glint, we were able to communicate and follow through on those things that needed to improve. And today we still have a lot of people working remotely, and we are staying connected with them, not just through obviously pulsing, but it shows that, it showed we cared, and we have followed through with other pulses. Finally, to summarize, also using the pulsing methodology, whether it's the target talents or others, this is really important. Future leaders, talking to people on competence development programs, where are we now, where are we going? It's where data becomes really meaningful, and we're using this data to really tell a story, where we are, what we're learning, the improvements we can make, and it has been quite fundamental and step changing for us on our journey to do the employee experience versus the employee engagement. And adopting the design thinking, I would say our partnership with Glint has accelerated this credibility that we have, that we are truly listening with credibility. Before I go, one real time saver has been the comments and the sentiment and this level of alarms and alerts. When you need to turn around the results for executives in 24 hours and what are the highlights and what are the pockets for improvement, really the alerts are really super, and it makes us look like superstars to be able to work with that data. So that's it. I suppose what I want to say here is that we are actively using the insights, and I'm happy to take questions today, and I'm also happy for you to reach out to me either through email or through LinkedIn. So that's it, and apologies if we had some technical challenges, but delighted to be here. Back to you, and hopefully it has gone back okay.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks for bearing with us as we had some of those technical difficulties. What would an online event be without technical difficulty? And your story was really clear, so thank you for sharing that with us today. A few things that I noted down we're talking was the theme of being agile but still strategic, which I think came across really strongly. When we start to give more people access to data in this way, it's often results in people saying, well, we want more, right? And it was great to see that you were being agile and having lots of different programs across the life cycle, but still keeping it really strategic with a central calendar that planned out what we ask and when. And then I also like the theme of being simple but still strategic, right? The ACT framework and making it really simple for managers to take one step forward, but still tying your actions to what the business cares about, your business strategy, sustainability. So that was really great to see. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to some audience questions. We're going to start off with Jeremy and Annalise, and then hopefully we'll be able to bring back in at some point. Please do keep your questions coming through. We're keeping an eye on them in the attendee hub, so you have the opportunity to ask them. I'm going to start off with this first question for Jeremy and Annalise, which is, with your always on pulse, how often are senior leaders sharing results with team members and discussing actions to be taken?
Yeah, great question, Matt. We've had really kind of this two-step approach. I referenced where we've been doing sort of the full census pulse surveys 3 times a year historically in partnership with Glint. And so that's been real time. As soon as the results are wrapped up, leaders go in and begin to review and to take action with their teams. And this always on for this year, our goal has been to sort of look at it week by week by week. And when we see specific actions to take, that's where a facility executive team will partner with their department leaders to say, how are we responding to this? So the expectation is really a minimum, a weekly review, and then taking action with some of the items that are real time around our dynamic environment with the COVID pandemic and experience this year.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. And we have a second related question. Annalise, maybe I'll direct this one to you first up, which is, let me find it. What do you see as some of the benefits of an always-on approach versus a scheduled survey that goes out to all employees? And maybe some of the things that you just had to kind of build in as watch-outs or different approaches that you've had to build in works for you.
My fear came true, which was my dog barking in the middle of this. Come here, come here. It really does paint that picture of continuous listening, doesn't it? An always-on approach will literally be always on. And maybe an additional insight for the audience is an additional insight is that we were actually in a workforce survey pause. We were re-looking at all of our surveys, and we were a bit silent as we were trying to coordinate everything that we wanted to strategically do in terms of listening to the team member. But it became very quickly apparent to our leadership that we needed to listen to the feedback of our team members during this crisis. And an always-on approach felt just right for us to continuously listen to them, because it has been, just as the waves of COVID have been, the waves of our experience have been in that same picture. And now we can follow those trends. So I feel privileged to be able to, on the computer side, be able to see those waves, those colors, those sentiments come through. And I know that our leaders also feel the assurance that we have the feedback from our employees to make those critical decisions just in time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Annalise. And we welcome furry friends into the conversation. What you guys didn't see is that my cat actually broke into the room midway through, and he has a lot of FOMO if he's not on camera. So I was kind of batting him away while you were talking. So everybody to today's session. Okay, another question for you both. As you mentioned, different areas of the US were hit harder by COVID-19 at different times throughout this ongoing pandemic. How were you able to determine which sites needed more support than others at a given time?
That's a really good question, and I'm sure Annalise could answer this as well. From my standpoint, that was one of the powerful parts of an always-on pulse, is because we have our HRIS data feeding to Glint, real-time demographics without the user needing to give them. We knew exactly where the responses were coming from, by location, by department, by job role, and we could really pinpoint where the pain points were. And so this tool really helped us to do that. And sure enough, where we're located earlier on, Florida, Texas, we saw some of that some of the challenges bubble up. And now we're seeing it more in Kansas and Colorado and some of those other areas where it's harder hit currently. And so it's been fascinating to see the responses and the need mirror where the challenges are as it relates to COVID. And so the tool really helped us to pinpoint it.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Sandra, welcome back. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Great, Sandra, we have a question for you. Sandra, how do you ensure and track that managers are taking action on results?
I suppose first off, we are starting from a position of trust. So we have done the very heavy action planning before, and it didn't work for us. We spent more time planning the action than we did acting. So what we are doing is we're having high-level plans, and then because the dashboard is available to every manager, the manager makes the meaningful plan and puts it onto the agenda item of the team meetings, which are typically bi-weekly or monthly. And then this also goes through for the executives and for the C-suite leaders. So it's pretty open. What are the plans? What's happening? And that's why it's interesting as we get ready to see the trends. Let's see if the hard work pays off. But we are coming from a position of trust here because everybody knows their own team, and we are trying to build this.
That's great. And what you said about, we spend more time planning really resonates with me. We kind of talk about the 80-20 rule, right? And historically, we spent 80% of our time planning an action and only 20% actually doing anything. And we wanted to flip that. And it's great to hear that you're using, for example, the ACT framework, knowledge where we are, collaborating where we want to go, and just take one simple step forward. That has been impactful across tens of thousands of managers that we've seen over the last few years. So great to hear that you're using that and it's being impactful for you. Sandra, I have another question for you. How did managers and leaders react to getting results in 24 hours? Were they excited or were they overwhelmed by that?
No, they were. I think in the beginning, they couldn't believe that it would happen. And then when it happened, they were like, that's it. And it soon went from it being a HR-centric process to the managers taking the process and owning it. And as I mentioned, we're a data-based company. A lot of engineers are coming with the chemical background, so the data makes a big difference. And then you had them doing their own analysis and pivots. But in most cases, we said, please use the formats, please keep the the format, and let's get used to using the dashboards and understanding them. And even today, I was in a meeting with the other senior leaders, and Glint was mentioned 3 times. So it's part of our way of working. So it brings a huge amount of credibility when you are not analyzing for 2 weeks or something. You are just giving it immediately.
Yeah, Matt, if I may add a quick perspective from Advent Health on that as well. Before Glint, it was taking 6-7 weeks to get results after the survey closed. And with Glint, we actually put a self-imposed waiting period initially. We didn't trust our leaders. We have over 7,000 people leaders across our organization. We're like, we need to know what the data is first before we give it to them. So we actually had a week cooling off period initially before, but as we got more comfortable with the results and saw the accuracy of it, we turned that off to say, it should be real time. The minute the survey closes, they get a full picture. We want to make sure it gets to the leaders as soon as possible. Our leaders have loved it. And we're at a point now to say, why not show it to them real time? And that's what we've done with the Pulse survey. Is it's real time. It comes in, you get your confidentiality threshold, boom, there are the results for you. You can take action on them.
That's really wonderful. I love the theme of trust that's coming through. Trusting our managers and our leaders with this data. I fundamentally believe that managers and leaders want to be good managers and good leaders, and they can do that through knowing how their employees feel. Historically, we have protected them perhaps too much, and that has led to some issues with engagement surveys and programs being seen as owned by HR, and the action is owned by HR. But both Advent Health and you're great examples that actually entrusting people with data leads to great results. So wonderful stories there.
Probably one thing I would just add there is the other element to trust extends to participation. we saw not pushing the pulse and just letting it out there and let people feel it if they wanted, and no big ramp up. We saw the rates go up in the 60s to, in some cases, the pulses go to 80. And it was changed from you need to do it and you must do it, and there's a big program around it too. Oh, it's there. Yeah. And then this was the other piece of the trust, is that the meaningful part is that we weren't over managing the process before. And I think it becomes more credible participation then and response rate. So that's another lesson I would like to add.
Absolutely. Great lesson. Thanks, Sandra. We have another question, and Jeremy, maybe I'll start off with you here. The ACT framework focuses on taking one small step forward. I'm not sure how much you're using specifically the ACT framework, but I think the question still applies here. How do we use results to make long-term goals as well as impacting change in the short term? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's sort of, from a cultural and engagement retention journey, one of the things we've tried to shift to is to take small steps and not think about and be overwhelmed by, if I don't fix this, the entire thing's going to fall apart. But what's a small step I can take as a leader today? But I think as well, Matt, to the question, we've also looked at the themes from our comments, as well as sort of the drivers that we've seen around engagement, and use that to inform some of our longer term strategies. We're currently embarking on a 2030 aspirational journey that has 6 team member promises associated with it that says, this is what every team member every time will experience in our organization. And we've used the themes from our pulse survey results that we've garnered in the comment themes and also the score themes to be able to determine where our focus may be with those 6 team member promises to make sure we're making a significant difference. So not only is it helping leaders to take action and take those small steps, it's also helping us as an organization to think about our 10-year vision and our 5-year work plan going forward.
Annalise or Sandra, any other thoughts on that question of using data to help us with long-term actions as well?
I would probably say on that side, as an organization, we tend to be planners. So when we have been looking at the digital or the ways of working or the future of the workplace, we have been really trying to see what are the trends in the data and what can we predict for the future based on the trends. And I think that's the beauty of the data, is that when you can slice the data by the different stakeholder groups, that helps the planning. So for example, I mentioned earlier, we're using design thinking and we're doing personas. By having the data, not just broad sense, but actually in detail with the demographics, because it's into our HRIS system. Of course, my team are not seeing the detail of who's who within the system, but we're able to see the demographics. We are able then to support workforce planning and also able to support things like logistics, office space, and working from home and remote working practices, and so on and so forth. So these are medium to long term. And I mentioned earlier about the succession planning. That's 2 to 3 years. And we're using that for diversity and inclusion, and also thinking about the sense of belonging. So these things, the wheels don't move that fast, but the data helps us to see the trends. So that's very meaningful.
Great, thanks, Sandra. We're going to have a final question, unfortunately. Sandra, maybe I'll start off with you on this. In the spirit of expansion, what are your thoughts on how employee engagement is redefined for a remote workforce?
Could you repeat it now? I had a problem at the beginning.
Sure. So in the spirit of expanding on progress and looking to the future, employee engagement is going to change or be redefined for a remote workforce.
How do I see that playing out? Like I mentioned earlier, the beauty of having Glint is that you are able then to say, you are able to slice the data. So when you have a broad high level, let's say engagement score or sense of belonging, or that the organization cares, then you start to get into, so what does that mean for the minority groups? What does that mean for the different generation profiles? And then I would also say no one size fits all on the remote working. And I mentioned to you earlier that we have many people working remotely. It has helped us in the planning, What does it mean? I think the sentiment is the same. So this trust and outcome focus, that will continue, and that has worked for us. But of course, there are areas. What we need to do is support the leaders, how to lead and keep the sense of belonging and connection. And I think we will move to more and more around uncovering the sentiment and the caring element, which goes without saying when you're meeting people a lot, but when you're not seeing them and not traveling and not having the face-to-face, you need to ask the obvious questions.
Thanks, Sandra. And Annalise, maybe I'll frame that question slightly different for you. Obviously, remote work is not the same within a healthcare organization, but certainly I can imagine there's a lot of change going on in healthcare and a lot of external pressures on the environment. How do you see employee engagement changing, or the focus on engagement changing within healthcare?
If we learned one thing this year, is that we certainly do work better when we are collaborating, when we are together, when we have taken care of the relationship. One of at one point, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had about 16,000 remote workers consistently for the last few months. You may have hiked up to 18,000, but that's a lot of team members that are remote, that are support workers, to help keep our organization stay alive. We've learned a lot, and again, the benefit of having the Always On survey is we can see the waves of sentiment throughout. First, thank you for keeping me safe. I'm working from home. Thank you for still loving me. This is really hard. I'm, my children are trying to do school. I'm trying to do work. We're seeing those comments come through. And then again, please continue to keep me safe. What are we going to do? Next step. And so we can use those comments to influence planning, in which we are. But again, the other beautiful thing is that we have a large group of employees, of team members that will perpetually stay remotely, which is our IT team members. And so, and we recently had a review of all of our divisions, our regions, and all of the people success metrics, and we saw how their metrics, how their numbers are a lot higher in terms of engagement, in terms of their experience, even being remotely. What can we learn from those teams and replicate, extend to the rest of the organization? So an example of that is we are using Microsoft Teams to collaborate, to communicate with each other. And how can our partners at AIT help us provide training or equip people managers or teams across the organization to use that tool well, effectively? So there's lots that we can learn from that group that can be replicated to the organization, and I'm excited about that possibility.
Great, thanks so much. What a great note to end on, the theme of collaboration and connection. Jeremy, Annalise, Sandra, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your stories and for the great discussion. We're so grateful to have you here. And with that, thank you all as well. I'm going to hand it over to Katie.
All right. Well, that was a great session. Thank you, Annalise, Jeremy, and Sandra for sharing. Especially loved hearing, Annalise, your story. It sounds like something is catching on. So now we are going to kick it into our next break. But while you're doing that, we also have a great water cooler talk session ready for you. And that starts right now. So hop on over in your agenda and get into the water cooler talk if you want to connect and reflect on what you've learned. And otherwise, we'll meet back at the top of the hour, wherever you are, for our Ask the People Science Experts panel. We'll see you then.
Christus Health is a faith-based, not-for-profit health system that was started about 150 years ago by three sisters who answered a calling. We may not have the most resources, but what we do offer is a culture of caring for our patients.
Nationally, there's a talent shortage in healthcare. That means that as an organization, when we hire these great people, we have to do everything we can to retain them.
We do that by making sure that they are valued, that they feel heard, and that ultimately that they have the support that they need to do their job each and every day.
We used to do annual surveys for our associates. The problem was it took weeks or sometimes even months to get the results.
There were issues with associates being able to take the survey because our caregivers aren't sitting at a computer or a desk every day. They're out on the patient floors caring for patients.
We're only 2 Glint surveys in right now, and we're already seeing a huge impact. Our managers are dialed in to our associates' comments. We finished our survey on a Friday. By that Monday, we already had action plans rolled out, and our CEO was fully engaged.
Our associates want to do their best work. And so they want to learn the skills to manage stress or develop and grow in their careers. And by developing these skills, they're able to provide better care to our patients. LinkedIn Learning enables us to provide support to our staff without pulling them off the floor. Our caregivers know that they have a resource that's available to them whenever they need it.
When I see talent that I've hired move up the ladder, striving to do their best work and enjoy doing it, I've done my job. That's the ultimate reward.
Providing opportunities for learning and development is crucial to ensuring that we achieve our mission at Christus Health. We want to see our associates move up, not out. Making sure that our associates are growing and advancing in their careers. That's how you foster a culture of people success.
Hi everybody, and welcome back. My name is Matt Rodden. I'm your facilitator for today's session. I'm the head of People Science Consulting for North America at Glint. I'm really happy to welcome you back. I am joined by some lovely faces this afternoon for our Ask the Experts panel. This is going to be a fun session. This is where we get to put our experts in the hot seat. So I'm joined by some colleagues from across Glint and LinkedIn, and we will ask them your questions. So we've collated some great questions from the sessions today and yesterday that we didn't get into in the live Q&A, but also please do pose your questions. If there is a challenge that you're working on in your organization that you would like some advice from our people success experts, pop it in the chat. We'll keep an eye on that and we will pose them to this group. So let's get started with some intros. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves with their title and one their LinkedIn profile. So Chad, let's start off with you.
All right. My name is Chad Bennett. I'm assuming you can hear me okay, Matt. Awesome. My name is Chad Bennett. I am a senior people science consultant here at Glint, LinkedIn. I have over 20 years of experience in the space. And something that's not on my LinkedIn profile is that I do music. I've recorded over 70 songs in the last 10 years.
And I can attest to a very talented musician. We have to experience some of that on the Glint team. Bon, let's go to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Shabang Dave, coming to you from Dublin, Ireland. I manage our people science team that's based here. And one thing that's not on my LinkedIn profile is that I was once in a Cheerios commercial as a kid.
That's in a pretty frame. Thanks, Siobhan. Stacey, beat that. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Stacey Levine. Can you hear me okay, Matt?
Yep, got you.
Okay, great. I'm a senior consultant as well and a manager on the people science team. One thing not on my profile was that one of my prior jobs, I dabbled in puppeteering.
Wow. How did I not know this about you? Not know that. Amazing. And Rena, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rena E., and I am part of the LinkedIn People Analytics team. And my role here has been very much leading the survey strategies and working very closely with the Glint team in rolling out our employee voice surveys. So happy to be a part of this call. Something that's not on my LinkedIn profile is I have two beautiful sons, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Their birthdays are tomorrow and in 2 weeks, so very excited to be celebrating that.
Oh, that's awesome. Reno, we are so happy to have you here today and join us on this Experts panel. So we're going to kick off with our first question, and Chad, I'm going to direct this one to you, and then we'll invite others to comment as well. Chad, we've mostly hourly employees, and we find it difficult to have meaningful conversations because they are in stores, working directly with our customers, and they don't have. Do you have any suggestions for communicating with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I always try to tell, my clients is that we don't want to create extra, ways of communicating and extra ways of connecting outside of our normal business practices. And so if there are ways that you are already communicating with them, connecting with them, I would say, let's try to, incorporate this into those standard daily practices, right? We don't want you to create something, totally different just for, what we're trying to accomplish here. I always say we're trying to build a muscle, and this is something that will just take some commitment over time. But, for some of my retail clients, I know they have things like daily huddles where maybe they get together for, 10 or 15 minutes before everyone goes out on the floor, and just taking, a few minutes out in those daily huddles just to, try to tackle or discuss something briefly, and doing this on an ongoing basis is the way that I feel is best for, that type of situation.
Thanks, Chad. That's great advice. Any others want to comment or give any thoughts on how to engage and communicate with hourly employees? Don't all speak at once now. I'll wait it out.
Rarely do I leave people speechless, so I know someone's thinking something.
No, I would just echo what Chad said, meet people where they are, right? And we are trying to connect with people and through this work, and the best way to do that is to connect with them on their turf in ways that work for them.
Great. Thanks, Siobhan. Let's stick with you, and we'll go with our second question, which is, how do you help leaders and managers who say that there are too many priorities and cannot focus on another action plan, something that we commonly hear with our customers, right?
Yep, of course. I think of two things. So one is, don't overlook the power of things you can stop doing, or things that you can clear for your staff as their leader. So often the things that managers are best poised to do is to make the right judgment calls about what can be dropped. And it's a win-win when you can do that, because you as the leader have one less thing to have to worry about, and you're directly speaking to something that you've heard from your employees. The other thing that comes to mind for those of you who listened to Mala sing yesterday, she put this really nicely in her comments about creating a frictionless experience, is how do you integrate what you've learned into the things you're already doing to lead your team? So instead of viewing your obligation as a leader as the need to kind of stand up these extra projects or initiatives on the side, how do you just take what you've learned and incorporate it into the way that you lead your team already?
Thanks, Ron. Other comments from the group?
I'll just add is we're always saying we're not trying to boil the ocean. So just identifying one thing, just one thing only that, not necessarily that a manager or a leader needs to do, but what is something that we are committed to as a team? Because at the end of the day, this is all about people's success and the team's health. And in order to maintain our health, we have to, sometimes add, one extra, not add, but focus on something that's going to provide a meaningful outcome. And so just identifying one thing that's going to help make, your team more productive and agreeing what's something that we all can do to advance the ball, if you will. I think that goes a long way.
That's a great point, Chad. I think we've had lots of questions in the sessions today and yesterday about ACT and the importance of keeping it simple. I love the idea of one step. We often talk about our ACT framework, acknowledge where we are, collaborate as a group on where we want to go, and take one simple step. And that's a really powerful way of explaining to leaders that, number one, this is not all on them. And really, you just need to identify one simple thing. To your point, Chad, don't boil the ocean. Don't write a laundry list of things to do, but what's one simple thing that you and your team can do today, tomorrow, to make a change? Okay, let's move on to our next question. Rena, I'm going to come to you for this. If, as the admin and owner of your company's employee engagement pulse program, you could only do one action for the close-in engagement pulse, what would you suggest that would have the most impact across the company?
Yeah, I have one specific thing that we did actually 2 quarters ago, and that was after the close of the survey, we sent out an email to the entire company saying, hey, the survey has closed. Now you can actually see your results in the tool. And going back to your earlier point, Chad and Matt, is introducing the ACT framework and how we communicate that and repeat it over and over, like to go and just take one step and take one thing and try to focus on that one thing and apply the ACT framework has really helped. I've noticed that people actually have read the email and they started to have these conversations at the team level. And one example was even specifically for our team. We noticed that our recognition scores were low, and we focused on that one thing. How do we recognize our team members, even with just a simple email? And after we did that, the next quarter, we saw a boost in our recognition score. So simple things like that really makes a big difference. And I think just communicating to employees to apply the ACT framework has really helped.
Thanks, Rena. I'm going to come to Stacey with the same question. Really interested in your experience with customers. What's one thing that you've seen that's had the biggest?
I think having a way to collect stories of change and be able to communicate them out to the employees, and Katie as our storyteller has been really impactful for that. But really, I think there's so much that happens in an organization that's not really talked about or acknowledged. And I think organizations that do it really well have a process by which they're talking to managers who are getting improvements, trying to get underneath why, and then trying to tell those stories to others to energize them.
Great. I'm sure Katie is smiling widely, broadly running up the press. It's been a big theme of the last 2 days. I think I've heard words matter, the way you tell stories, focusing on the spotlights, the part of the organization that are doing something really well has such a big impact. So thanks, Stacey, for sharing that. I'm going to stick with you for our next question, Stacey. How do you suggest you take action on survey results at an enterprise level, a business unit level, and a team level? That feels like a lot, right? How do we do it at a level?
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions about how to make it not feel so difficult when that happens. I think first and foremost, taking action at the team level is what really matters. We were just talking about having ACT conversations as a team. I think that's what employees really feel and remember, those conversations. So I think that's, up to the team to say, what's the one thing as a team that we're going to do? And then at the enterprise level, it's about taking an action that really a manager can't take, right? I think of one of the recent LinkedIn employee voice surveys where there was a lot of data around burnout, and that became a topic we talked about. So managers were given tools to be able to have conversations with their teams about the topic. At the same time, the organization, LinkedIn decided to have an additional time off for employees and things that you can take at the corporate level. So I think it's really all about where do you have the most impact. And with business unit, I think it comes down to, is there one thing that as a unit that we really need to do to be successful? And should we take action in an area? But I think it's more important that you get the team and the enterprise worked out first. Others want to add?
I'd love to add to that. And Stacey, that was beautifully said. Especially in terms of the action that we took at LinkedIn in instituting days off and mental health days off as being a specific action from all the feedback that we received from our employees. I also just, as someone who has really been looking at the survey results and being customer zero, I've noticed that it's a way, especially during COVID times, it's a way for people to express a lot of the emotions and their frustrations or their their feelings in the moment through the surveys. And for leaders, especially for us, when we come to the company all hands and our CEO says, hey, we hear you, we understand what you're going through, we care about your well-being. I think it really provides that level of support, even at the leadership level. So cutting across all of those different levels at the company and the team and for the employees has been tremendous for our organization.
Thanks, Rena. Okay, so we've got some great questions coming in. Keep them coming. We want to put our experts in the hot seat here, so let's not let them off too lightly. The next question I have is from Joe, and Siobhan, I'm going to come to you for this. What is the best way to influence senior executives to place less emphasis on benchmark and trend comparisons right now, given the impact of COVID-19? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, boy, I wish if I had a silver bullet for this, I feel like our jobs would be very different right now. But it's a tough task and one we are dealing with all the time right now because there's just a lot of guesswork involved. A lot of executives naturally are trying to parse out, what about their results they can attribute to COVID versus just the way of doing business. And they're often uncomfortable trying to let go of benchmark comparisons that they've relied on for years and years. One of the things that we've really embraced is just owning the uncertainty and embracing the unknowns right now and the possibilities that those unknowns create to do things differently. And that for us has resulted in directly giving and also coaching our customers to give very sort of frank, candid messages to their executives about the things we don't know right now, the fluidity in the situation, the reality that the term benchmark in and of itself sort of connotes where you should be. And in a situation as unprecedented as this one, who's to say where anyone should be other than where they are relative to their own selves 6 months ago and relative to where they want to be when they sort of navigate the next 6 months of the pandemic. So I think just sort of leaning into the unknowns and almost presenting that up as a challenge for executives to confront with, that to me has been sort of the most productive way to tackle this question.
Yeah. I'll just add on that, Siobhan is absolutely right. And for me, it's really about, once you have a trend, and to me, that's the most important thing, right? Benchmarks are important to understand how items perform in general, right? And once you understand that, then the most important thing becomes, where are we in that comparison? But then how are we moving over time, right? And once you have at least 2 data points, the question becomes, where are we and how did we get here and what do we need to change? So, my thing is, yes, benchmarks are important to ground us in how items perform on average, because we know items perform differently depending on their wording and their scale. But over time, it's that trend and understanding why, behind the trend and what can we do to influence that trend moving forward is what's most important.
Love that. Thanks both. I think there's one thing I can add that I would add to that. This is something that came up in one of our early sessions was we see the data as the start of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. We have a tendency, particularly in data-driven organizations, to get really into the data and let's see the cut a different way. Or what if we change the benchmark? Would that mean a different result and a different outcome? But actually, if we can educate our stakeholders on just use this as a way forward to have a conversation with your team and again, figure out that one step forward, that loses some of the over-reliance on the numbers. Great. So, next question, Stacey, I'm going to come to you on this. This is a question for Corey. What would you say is the most important takeaway for smaller organizations to build a successful program? For example, we're about 300 employees worldwide.
I think for smaller organizations, I would lean more heavily on kind of going back to what you just said, Matt, which is the conversations, because what you can't do is slice and dice and try to get underneath in the same way, and you really shouldn't have to. I think with those organizations, just sticking to broader organization-wide trends, maybe some business unit, where you can. But at the end of the day, I would be much more grounded and really focused on the conversations that you have, and make that really important as well. And then just to have people in the organizations that are champions of the process, that can take a role in leading and advocating as you move forward, because you may not have in a small organization a dedicated employee experience person, right? So there you want to sort of look at who you have in the organization who can help you drive the process forward.
Rena, I'm interested in your perspective here. I mean, LinkedIn is obviously a very large organization with thousands of employees, but we still have managers of teams who have very small groups and may not get data from a feedback program. What advice do you give to them when they're dealing with small teams and how to make best use of that?
Yeah, I think that the biggest impact there is really at the team level, at the local level. And so, even something as simple as having those conversations at the team level and where you can drive some of the actions and the impact is, impactful in and of itself. And then, how that rolls up across the rest of the organization, it lends itself to a lot of trends that you see across these larger groups. And I think that those conversations that happen at the leadership level, it becomes a lot more alive using the survey data. And so hopefully that answers the question, but then I think it really just having those conversations at the local levels and then being able to spur some of those conversations up at the leadership level using these results has been very helpful.
Great, thanks, Rena. I'm going to stick with you for the next question, if that's okay, which is how can I influence up to my senior leaders the importance of comments? They have been reluctant so far to enable comments in all questions because they worry about the extra time it would take for employees to fill out the survey. Rena, did I lose you there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think there was a little delay, but I did hear the question. Okay. I think for us, we have a very rigorous privacy and security guidelines that we follow, and one of the things that we write on our notices is that all of the feedback that they provide is confidential and is only reported at the aggregate level. And our threshold minimum comment number is actually 10. So if there's anything fewer than 10, then we don't report it at all in the field. I think that by and large, people have been very embracing of that. People have been a lot more transparent, more so than I had expected actually in the comments, and we we actually get a lot of insights, especially nowadays. Through our narrative intelligence tool, we leverage it quite a bit, especially nowadays when we're asking very crucial questions about how people are doing during the pandemic, working from home, well-being, all of these things. And at a high level, the scores are very telling just to show you relatively how people are feeling, but then the comments themselves, like the sheer transparency, and the insights that it brings to the narrative intelligence tool has been very striking for us and insightful for the leadership. And so we haven't had any issues at all in terms of people being concerned. There might have been, a few comments around like, yeah, I'm not that comfortable answering this question. But for the most part, I would say 99% of the time, people are very transparent.
Thanks, Rena.
Matt, can I?
Yeah, Chad, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, comments offers us the opportunity to uncover new aspects around a given topic that, we may not have been thinking about, or, also because we're doing shorter surveys, it provides us, additional information that we would have gathered maybe from a longer survey where we're asking multiple questions and creating dimensions and indices. The beauty of our platform and technology in general is that we can now ask single item measures, do a much shorter survey, but still get as much information out of it because of the comments, because I'm now able to leave, something that is meaningful to me, and then we're able to discuss it. So to me, the comments are important, and obviously in this time, because of the extra benefits of understanding the nuances of what we're trying to measure.
Thanks, Chad. Great advice. I think I would say, in short, encourage your leaders to be bold. I cannot think of one customer who has regretted asking more comments on their questions, right? We can serve it up in a really easy way to them, but the insights are so powerful from those types of comments. Unfortunately, we're on our final question. This time goes so quick. Siobhan, I'm going to come to you for this one. Any ideas on how to proactively address potential engagement dips as we look towards the majority of the workforce remaining remote in 2021?
Well, I love the proactiveness. I would say there's very little that's predictable, of course, about where this is all going. But what we know, based on what we're experiencing ourselves right now, is that connection matters more than ever. And we have the benefit right now of getting to live through the types of connection that are working for us and our teams, and the types that aren't serving us well anymore. So if if all else fails and you're trying to plan around, around kind of keeping people engaged with headwinds approaching next year, look for opportunities to create, new and meaningful connections among your people. Really put an emphasis on, keeping your work really people-centric, as we talk about, because that way, regardless of the ebbs and flows in your own individual business, or what else might come along, you've at least got that foundation, that connection that you've invested in now.
Unfortunately, we're at time. I know we could have a conversation for another hour probably, but thank you guys so much. Chad, Siobhan, Stacey, Rena, really appreciate your advice. Love the themes that were coming out today around conversations. We talk about people success. This is a people success summit. Conversations is one of the best people success habits that we can push in our organization. So really appreciate the focus there, as well as thinking about the opportunity we have, right? That's been a big theme for me over the last 2 days of this summit. There's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of external pressure, but actually we can look at things more positively and see that there's an opportunity to become more people-centric and think about how we best engage our people. So I love that those themes came out today in the conversation. Thank you again so much for your time. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Katie to talk to us about what's next.
Thanks, Matt. Well, team, we are at the end of our main sessions here. Like Matt said, wow, time goes so fast. It has truly been a joy to spend these last couple of days with you all. And I want to thank you all for joining us on your people success journey. Tomorrow, we'll get into our breakout sessions. So we have our Europe and our Americas breakout sessions, our Glint customer session, and then the topic-specific breakout sessions that you should all have in your agenda, in your personalized attendee hub. And remember, you can always rewatch any of the main sessions that we've shown here today and yesterday within the attendee hub by navigating to it and clicking on replay. And remember to join the People Success Forum. I know where there were lots of questions over the course of today and yesterday, as well as in the last session, that didn't get answered. And guess what? All of our people science consultants are in that forum and they're ready to answer your questions. So please join us there if you haven't already. And as we wrap up our main sessions today, I do want to give a big, big, big thank you to all of our speakers who we've had over the last couple of days, as well as to the producing staff at CVent. You had a big job and we really appreciate you walking us through this. Also want to give a big shout out to Matt and to Justin for making sure that everything worked out so smoothly. And of course, to our very own Sam Riley, who is safely behind the scenes, but is doing so, so, so much to make sure that we all get through this smoothly, we learn, and we continue to connect. And of course, I want to thank all of you for spending the last couple of days and tomorrow with us. It's such a pleasure to be in this community with you all. So finally, to bring us home, I am going to pass it over to the original champion of the People Success Summit, one of the founders of this fantastic conference, and of course, my friend and my mentor, Jim Bell. Take it away, Jim.
Wow, thank you so much, Katie. Fantastic job hosting. Unfortunately, you didn't get the stage and almost knock over a laptop or a glass of water or any of those fun things, but next year, hopefully. I do love this event. When Sam and I first started working on this in 2017, we really wanted to bring this community together. Not to talk about products, not to talk about Glint, but a place where people could share their experiences, where people could be specific, where you could find your tribe. And that was our hope. We know that all of you work typically in small teams. There aren't a lot of people in your organizations who do what you do. And so you need a community like this, or at least that was the premise of this whole event. And we're hoping that you're finding that to be the case, especially for those of you who are new to it this year. So along the lines of staying connected, I wanted to share with you a little gift box we're going to be sending you all. Inside of it, on the next slide, you can see a few little examples. The first is really to tell, as we've framed this conference around the first step of creating your plan. And we heard some of the stories about this. We're going to send you a little notebook with some guidance in it on how to move forward and build your plan. The second is around driving alignment. This one we're taking a little more metaphorically with a cool little stone rock setting toy that you can keep on your desk and play with and use to just remind you to that how important alignment is to this whole process. And the third is around implementing change. And in that, you'll see we've gotten you a little sort of guided coloring book and some colored pencils to help you think about change and go through those steps that we're managing change. And then the fourth, as we've talked about today, is building on progress. And that's where we're going to send you what we've used throughout these summits, which is our Glint Summit challenge coins. And so I want to share a little bit of what these mean. For those of you who've been at the Glint Summits before, you know this. You know this is something that we care about. It was so cool to see people on LinkedIn this morning doing coin checks, and I see some of the folks in our group holding up their coins. So I want to share a little bit about what this coin means. You'll see some examples on the left here of the ones we've had over the past 4 summits. You'll see the design of the challenge coin that you'll receive on the right. In each case, we generally put the, sort of the Glint Summit logo on the front, and on the back, we have something that refers to sort of the location and the theme of the event. So this year is more global, so that's why we've got the globe on the coin. And just to give you a little of background, not everyone is familiar with challenge coins. They come from a military background, and while they're different origin stories, the one that's most commonly understood and my favorite is that it originally started with an American officer during World War I, created these medallions for his squadron And as they were flying in World War I, one of his young flying aces was shot down over Germany and was captured. And the Germans took away all of his possessions, with the exception of a pouch that he had around his neck that carried this medallion that he had from his commanding officer. So he ultimately escaped, made his way to France, and was, found by the French troops, who immediately thought he was a spy. They thought he was a saboteur, and actually he was scheduled to be executed. And it was only the fact that he had this pouch, was able to produce this medallion or this coin, and one of the French officers actually recognized it, that bought him enough time for them to eventually validate that he was in fact an American pilot, because he had no other identification. And so coming out of that, where that became sort of this idea of a coin check that I mentioned, is that in many troops and now in other organizations, it's treated as sort of a bond of unity of the group. And because in this case, with this one pilot, it saved his life, this idea of the coin check came about, which is if you were in a bar somewhere with other members of your troop or your squadron or whatever, you would sort of, slam your coin down on the bar and call for a coin check. If any of your fellow sort of troop members or former troop members, they had to produce their coin to show that they had their coin, because in fact, it was a way to help remember that you need to keep this on you to potentially save your life. And if you weren't able to produce the coin, you had to buy the round. If the person who did the coin check and made the challenge found that everyone had their coins, then the person who made the coin check had to buy the round. So anyway, I just wanted to tell you that story because we really believe this is a journey, and now more than ever that we're all working remotely, and we're sharing with you from our bedrooms and offices with cats and dogs, and doing our own tech support. It's more important than ever to stay connected. So hopefully you've found people as a part of this that you'll stay connected with. Look for that gift box from us as a way of saying thank you for spending the time with us and for being on this journey with us. I've never worked at a place where I felt so much on the same mission as our customers. And of course, this goes way beyond Glint customers. This is not about Glint. This is about all of you who are helping make people's success a reality. So looking forward to see you all tomorrow in the breakouts. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
The Glint Summit makes me feel very excited to be an HR practitioner right now. I feel supported, and I'm really looking forward to using the tool to inspire our organization to be as highly productive and growth-focused as they possibly can.
I really like how small the Glint Summit is. It's a great opportunity to connect in a more personal way. You have a lot more time to really get to know different stories and different approaches to employee engagement. And I think that makes it more meaningful to me to have things to take home back to our organization.
The Glint Summit always makes me feel excited and included in a group of people that I can consider family in the industry.
The sessions are great, the topics are amazing, but it's really being able to bring people together and share our experiences, share our stories, and not feel like you're just navigating through a sea of thousands of people.
The format of the summit has been very engaging, very short speakers in the morning and then a longer keynote, which was fantastic, so inspiring.
I picked this summit specifically because the practitioner-led sessions is so powerful. We have a bunch of people from all different industries, people in people analytics, people doing learning and development, and they're sharing their best practices as well as the mistakes that they made. That's a very powerful thing to learn.
I love the fact that it's real stories from real people, and that's what's important. In my world, I have people I can bounce ideas off of, but they don't truly know intimately what my ins and outs are in my job. The people here do. It's a lot easier to have valuable conversations with people who know what I do.
From start to finish, it's just been an awesome learning opportunity, personally and professionally, to get to learn much more about engagement.
People should come to the Glint Summit to learn, to grow,
and to share best practices. It's all about making great connections and learning something new.